Hey everyone, welcome back to Mr.X Files. If you're new here, this is the place where we dive into the mysteries that keep you up at night. Whether you're here to relax, fall asleep, or spiral into an existential crisis at 3 in the morning, you're in the right place. Drop a comment, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. And yeah, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. Alright, let's get into it. It was October 1997. I was 34 years old, 6 years out of the Army Signal Corps, and making a solid living as a private contractor. My specialty was fixing communication systems at government facilities. Nothing flashy. Mostly routine stuff, maintaining radio repeaters, checking satellite uplinks, making sure the quiet backbone of military communications stayed online, the kind of work that kept everything running without anyone noticing. The job offer came through my regular contact, Morrison. He was a guy who worked for a company that worked for another company, and if you followed the paper trail long enough, it all led back to the Department of Defense. That was just how these things worked. "This one's easy money," Morrison said over the phone. "Routine maintenance, underground comms gear out near Dulce, New Mexico. Just some Cold War leftovers. Old surveillance sites, most of them sealed, up. But the antennas and repeaters still need babysitting. You'll be in and out. 2-3 weeks max." He paused before adding, "Standard clearance will get you through." I should have asked more questions. Should have wondered why they needed someone with my exact background. I didn't just know electronics. I knew military communication systems, protocols, redundancy setups, encryption layers. I should have noticed that the pay was unusually high, almost double my usual rate. But I didn't ask. I took the job. The drive from Albuquerque to Dulce was stunning. It cuts through some of the loneliest, most beautiful land in the southwest. High desert, sun-baked and still, slowly giving way to pine forests as the road climbs toward the Rockies. Dulce itself is small, maybe 3,000 people, mostly. Jicarilla Apache, a tight-knit town. Strangers don't go unnoticed. I checked into the only motel I could find, the Desert Rose. It looked like it hadn't been renovated since the 70s. The desk clerk was an elderly Apache man with weathered skin and eyes that looked like they'd seen too much. He glanced at my government credentials, gave a small nod, and handed me a tarnished brass key with the number 14 etched into it. "Road to the mesa gets rough after dark," he said. "Wait till morning." That night, I lay in the motel bed, unable to sleep. I wasn't used to real silence. City silence is filled with background noise, traffic, humming lights, the occasional siren in the distance. But the desert has a different kind of silence. It's not empty. It's full of something ancient and watchful. It presses in on you, like it knows you're there. Somewhere in that heavy silence, I started hearing it. A low hum, deep and slow, not quite sound, more like a vibration at the edge of hearing. It felt like the earth itself was breathing. The next morning, I set out for the site. About 12 miles north of town, a side road branched off Highway 64. It was barely marked. A small, faded government sign that said, "Authorized personnel only, U.S. government property." I turned onto it. The road twisted through thick pine and juniper trees. Climbing higher into the mesa, Achuleta Mesa loomed ahead, massive and immovable, like a sleeping beast under a blanket of trees. It had a presence. You could feel it even through the windshield. The entrance to the facility was almost laughable. A rusted chain-link gate with barbed wire along the top. A squat, crumbling guard shack that looked abandoned. Beyond that, concrete structures and weathered radio towers were scattered across a large clearing at the base of the mesa. I held up my contractor badge to the scanner on the gate. It buzzed and clicked, and the gate slowly creaked open with a sound that echoed against the rock face like a warning. I reminded myself I was here to fix radios, not poke around, not ask questions. But even then, something felt off. On the surface, it was all as expected. Old satellite dishes, beat-up antennas, a few repeater units half buried in gravel. The gear was dated but still ticking. Government installations don't throw anything. Out if they can help it. Still, things didn't quite add up. The first thing I noticed was the power draw. According to the load readings, the site was pulling a lot more electricity than the equipment on the surface would need, at least triple. Cooling systems ran louder than they should have, too, far more powerful than what you'd need for the few pieces of gear I could see. The work orders mentioned underground repeaters, Cold War-era bunkers designed to keep communication, lines running after a nuclear strike. I'd dealt with those before, buried deep, shielded, self-contained. I found 3 tunnel entrances listed in the blueprints. 2 of them were exactly what the note said, sealed up tight, filled in with concrete. Bright yellow warning signs declared them unstable. You couldn't even see more than a foot into them, just grey dust and dead air. But the third one, that one was different. It was supposed to be sealed too. The blueprint marked it with the same caution warning. But when I hiked out to its location, down a narrow trail behind the far repeater tower, I found the entrance sitting open. Not wide open, just enough. Single steel door sat half ajar, its rusted hinges frozen in place. Someone had cut the lock clean off, bolt cutters, or maybe a torch. A faint draft came from within, cool and dry, carrying with it a faint mechanical odour, like old electronics and ozone. No caution tape, no signs, just a darkness that seemed to swallow the light. I stood there for a while, unsure. This wasn't part of the job. I wasn't supposed to go underground, at least not without escort or clearance. But that door, it was like it was waiting, like someone had opened it for me. I told myself I'd just take a quick look, just to confirm it was the right tunnel, document the breach, report it, and move on. But the moment I stepped inside, I knew something wasn't right. The concrete seal on the third tunnel looked solid at first, old, weather-stained, but intact. Then I noticed the cracks, not spiderweb fractures, but long, pressure-borne fissures, likely caused by years of seismic stress or just age. I knelt down and ran my fingers along one. Cool air brushed across my skin, a faint draft moving outward from the darkness behind the broken barrier. That alone set off warning bells. The other tunnels were tombs, sealed tight with dead air inside. This one was breathing. The scent hit me next. Not strong, but distinct. Machine oil, metal, and a trace of ozone. Not the smell of rot or decay. The smell of something still alive, still running. I should have stopped right then. I should have backed out, called Morrison, told him what I'd found, let the higher-ups figure it out. But I didn't. Curiosity and a quiet, irrational pressure I couldn't quite name pushed me forward. I chipped at the crumbling edges of the seal with my flashlight and my boot until I made enough space to squeeze through. The first 50 feet were unremarkable. Walls of roughly cut stone, reinforced with rusting steel beams and sagging concrete. It looked exactly like every Cold War-era military tunnel I'd ever seen. But then, the tunnel changed. The rock gave way to smooth, unnaturally polished walls. The ceiling leveled into a perfect geometric plane. Supporting beams gleamed faintly in my flashlight's beam. Sleek, seamless, and nothing like 1950s engineering. They looked too advanced, like something you'd find in a modern research facility, not buried in a mesa. I kept moving. The tunnel curved slightly, dipping down at a shallow angle. The silence was immense, broken only by the faint scuff of my boots and the low buzz of my flashlight. About 200 feet in, the tunnel opened into a chamber that stopped me cold. An elevator shaft, but not the industrial kind I'd expected. No clunky buttons, no exposed mechanics. The doors were smooth brushed steel. The control panel was clean, minimal. Above the button was a small badge reader, softly lit. Next to it, the floor display glowed a soft blue. B1, B2, B3. B7I pulled out my DoD contractor badge, more out of habit than any real expectation, and held it to the reader. Beep. The light turned green. Then, from deep below, I heard machinery stir. soft, steady. The hum of something long asleep waking up. The elevator doors opened with a whisper. Inside, the lighting was subtle, ambient. The walls were polished metal, the floor a rubberized material like what you'd see in a sterile lab. It didn't feel like a bunker. It felt corporate, high-end, purpose-built. I hesitated, then I stepped in. The doors closed silently behind me. I didn't press anything. The elevator began to descend on its own. There were no visible lights in the shaft, no windows, no sense of motion. Just the floor indicator blinking quietly as the numbers ticked by, B1, B2, B3. Then it stopped. B4. The doors slid open into complete darkness. Not dimness, absolute black. My flashlight beam seemed to hit a wall of ink. But there was sound, machinery, humming and rhythmic, pulsing like a mechanical heartbeat deep in the distance. And something else. A sound like breathing. Slow, heavy breathing. Far too large, too deep to be human. I stayed inside the elevator, paralyzed. My whole body screamed to leave, but I couldn't stop staring into that black void, trying to make sense of it. At the very edge of the light, I thought I saw shapes, angular outlines, smooth surfaces, like walls, corridors, equipment. And there was movement, quick, just a flicker, like something ducked out of view the moment my light touched it. I didn't. Wait. I didn't call out. The doors began to close. I let them. The elevator rose, silent and steady. But as I stood there alone, I realized something that made my spine go rigid. I hadn't touched a single button. The elevator had stopped at B4, on its own, as if something had called it, as if something had been expecting me. Back on the surface, everything felt different. The sunlight was too bright, the air too thin. My skin crawled with a tension I couldn't shake. I went through the rest of the day like a ghost, checked the satellite uplinks, logged power levels, calibrated the repeaters, but my thoughts were buried deep under the mesa. What the hell was that place? Who had built it? Why had my clearance worked? This wasn't part of any maintenance contract I'd ever taken. That night, back in room 14 at the Desert Rose, I opened my laptop and started digging. I didn't expect much. Maybe old declassified files, geological surveys, but the search led me down a rabbit hole of fringe forums and conspiracy blogs. Most of it was junk. Wild theories, alien bases, secret underground wars. But then I stumbled onto a name. Phil Schneider, a geologist and engineer, reportedly contracted to work on deep underground military facilities in the early 90s. He'd given a handful of lectures before his death in 1996, claimed he'd helped build a 7-level facility beneath Dulce, where humans and extraterrestrials worked side by side on classified projects. Mind control, genetic experiments, weapons research, horrific stuff. He said he'd seen things, mutated creatures, hybrid experiments. He talked about a firefight in the lower levels, said he was one of the few who made it out alive. Schneider was found dead in his apartment. Official cause, suicide. But people close to him said he'd been paranoid in the months before, claimed he was being followed, watched, that he'd gone public because he didn't think he had much time left. I sat there, staring at the screen, shut the laptop and tried to sleep. I couldn't. Every time I tried to fall asleep, I heard it again, the breathing. It wasn't human. Not even close. It came from level B4, slow and heavy, like some massive creature just below the surface. Each breath echoed up through the concrete, too deep to be natural, too large, too calm. It made my skin crawl. The next morning, I wasn't alone at the site. A man was standing at the gate when I arrived, leaning casually against a black government sedan that definitely hadn't been there the day before. He looked to be in his 50s, with thinning grey hair and the kind of tired, nondescript face you'd forget the second you looked away. Years of government work will do that to you, I guess. As I got closer, he held up a badge, civilian contractor, Clearance, like mine, but deeper, much deeper. "You're the communications tech," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah, that's right. And you are?" "Someone who used to work here. Someone who knows what you found yesterday." He nodded, toward the mesa. "Walk with me." We followed a maintenance path that hugged the base of the rock. As we moved farther from the gate and out of range of any surveillance equipment, he finally stopped and turned to face me. "My name's Dr. Marcus Webb," he said. "I was stationed here from 1983 to 87. Worked on projects I still can't talk about, not officially. I left when things got complicated, but I've been keeping tabs on this place ever since." "Why?" I asked. "Because your badge triggered dormant systems, ones that should have stayed quiet. You weren't supposed to find that elevator. The tunnel should have been sealed years ago, but sometimes, things down there," he paused, "sometimes they want to be found." There was a heaviness to his voice, a kind of worn-out dread that clung to his words. In the soft morning light, he looked older, drained, like the secrets he carried had taken more than sleep from him. "What do you know about Dulce Base?" he asked. "Not much," I admitted. "Some stuff online, conspiracy theories, rumors about underground labs, aliens, that kind of thing." He gave a dry laugh. "Most of the theories get the details wrong, but the heart of it, the important part, that's real. There's something under this mesa the public isn't ready to know about." He pulled a cigarette from his coat, lit it with hands that weren't steady. 7 levels. That part's true. Top 3 are human-run. Air Force and DARPA. Black. Budget tech. Advanced materials. Propulsion systems. Stuff that'll show up in textbooks in 30 years, maybe. He exhaled smoke through his nose, his eyes scanning the mesa like it might come alive. Level 4 is where things get weird. Mind control experiments, psychic testing, attempts to expand consciousness with machines. It grew out of MK Ultra, but it went directions the CIA never dreamed of. I stood frozen, trying to take it all in. Level 5's medical, he continued. Genetic modification, human enhancement. Some of it noble, curing diseases, improving longevity, but some of it, he shook his head. Some of it crossed every ethical line we had. And level 6, he hesitated. We called it Nightmare Hall, he said quietly. Human-alien genetic integration, not cooperation, integration. They were trying to create hybrids, beings that combined the best traits of both species. My stomach turned. A tight, icy knot formed deep inside me. "And level 7? I asked. His eyes narrowed. "Level 7 is where the real partners work," he said. "The ones who aren't human, the ones who've been here longer than we have." He dropped the cigarette and crushed it under his boot. "You're not cleared to know any of this," he said. "Hell, I'm not cleared to tell you, but I'm dying. Cancer, maybe from radiation, maybe just time catching up. Either way, there are things that need to be said before the next phase begins." I stared at him, my heart pounding. "What next phase?" "They're reopening the lower levels. Activity's been ramping up for 5 years now. New people, new funding, new experiments. Whatever they discovered back in the 80s, they're ready to move forward, this time on a much bigger scale." As if on cue, the low rumble of engines cut through the stillness. 2 black SUVs came speeding up the access road, dust swirling behind them. "That's your cue to leave," Webb said calmly. "Take what? I've told you. Forget where you heard it, and stay the hell away from Dulce. Some knowledge is too heavy to carry." But as the SUVs rolled past us, headed straight for the gate, I knew I couldn't walk away. Not yet. Something about that elevator, the way it had stopped on B4 like it was expecting me, it didn't feel random. It felt like an invitation, and I still had too many questions, too many pieces that didn't fit. That, my involvement wasn't random, was it? I asked quietly. "I need to know more." Webb looked at me with an expression that was hard to read, part sadness, part regret, maybe pity. "No, you don't," he said. "But you're going to dig anyway. Just be careful what you bring back up. Some things are meant to stay buried." The SUVs passed us without even slowing down, heading straight for the facility. But something about them caught my eye. And, when I looked closely, a chill ran down my spine. The license plates were wrong, not government, not civilian, no numbers, no letters, just symbols. Strange curved markings that looked almost familiar, like something I'd seen in dreams I couldn't fully remember. Symbols that stirred something in the back of my mind. Something old. Something that didn't belong. Every part of me was screaming to walk away, to drive home and forget any of this ever happened. But I didn't. I couldn't. That elevator hadn't stopped on B4 by accident. It felt like a pull, like it had opened just for me. That afternoon, I went back. The SUVs were gone, but the air around the facility had changed. Heavier, like the weight of a coming storm. There was a hum in the concrete, low and persistent, louder now. It felt like anticipation. I moved carefully toward the hidden entrance, through the cracked passage I'd widened the day before. The tunnel itself felt different now. Warmer, faintly pulsing with heat, like something deep beneath the ground had started to wake up. When I reached the elevator shaft, I saw that the control panel had changed. It no longer just showed floor numbers. Symbols now scrolled across the screen, the same ones I'd seen on the SUV plates. My hand hovered over the buttons, then I pressed B3. The descent was longer this time, slower, or maybe it just felt that way. When the doors finally opened, I stepped into a corridor that could have belonged to any high-end medical facility. Clean, white, clinical. But the silence was absolute. It was the kind of silence that made you feel like you were being watched. I chose the left hallway. It stretched ahead, lined with closed doors. Each door had a narrow window at eye level. I peeked into the first few. Empty exam rooms. Sterile, with surgical lights, metal tables, and restraint systems. This wasn't a hospital. These weren't patient rooms. This was for testing, for containment. The smell was sharp, chemical disinfectant, but there was something underneath it. Something wrong. Organic. Rotten. It was in the fifth room that I found it. The table wasn't empty. Something lay under a sheet, human-shaped, but off. The proportions were wrong. Too long in some places, too narrow in others. My gut twisted. I should have turned around. Should have walked out and never looked back. But I didn't. I stepped in. My fingers trembled as I reached for the edge of the sheet and pulled it back. It wasn't human, not completely, but it wasn't entirely alien either. Something in between. Its skin was a pale, lifeless grey, stretched tightly over bones that were almost human. Its eyes were too large, too black, reflecting the fluorescent light above, like ink. Its limbs were long and narrow, and its hands had too many fingers, 6, 7. But there were human traits too. A mouth, nose, patches of hair, a faint resemblance in the face, like a distorted reflection of us. It could have spoken English. It could have screamed. I dropped the sheet and stumbled. Back. That's when I realized. It was alive. Its eyes moved, locking onto mine with a slow, deliberate awareness. It saw me, understood me. The intelligence behind that stare wasn't human, but it was conscious. Watching. I ran. Down the hall. Back to the elevator. My heartbeat thundered in my ears as I smashed the button to close the doors. They slid shut. The elevator began to rise. Then I felt it. Someone else in the car. I didn't see them directly. Only a figure in a white lab coat, standing silently in the far corner, visible, just in my peripheral vision. But when I turned my head to look straight at it, nothing. No one was there. Still, the air was charged. I could smell ozone, and something else. Burnt copper. The elevator didn't take me all the way to the surface. It stopped at B2. The doors opened onto a darker, grimmer corridor, industrial, with thick pipes and wires running along the ceiling. The lights were dimmer here, flickering slightly. I could hear the low whine of machinery, generators, pumps, ventilation fans. But beneath it all was another sound. Voices, not speaking exactly, chanting, whispering. There were dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all talking at once, but not in any language I knew, not English, not anything remotely familiar. It felt ancient. It felt wrong. The sound came from deep in the facility, beyond my line of sight. Whatever was back there, I didn't want to see it. I pressed the button for the surface. My hand was shaking. The elevator resumed its climb. But the ride back wasn't normal. When the doors finally opened, I stepped out into sunlight, my lungs filled with fresh air. I felt the warmth of the real world again. And then I looked at my watch, 2:47 p.m. That was when I'd entered the elevator. But now, 6:23 p.m. Nearly 4 hours had passed. 4 hours of which I could only remember maybe 20 minutes. I don't know what happened in that lost time. Did I go deeper? Was something done to me? I still don't know. But sometimes, when I'm alone, when the world is quiet, I still hear the breathing from B4. And sometimes, I see those symbols again, in dreams, on walls, in places they shouldn't be. Had I seen things that were later erased from my memory? That question haunted me as I drove back to town, hands trembling against the steering wheel. My nose had started to bleed, just a thin stream, but I couldn't explain why. I hadn't hit my head. I hadn't been injured. It just started, and somehow, that unsettled me more than anything else. That night, I sat at my desk, trying to write down everything I'd experienced. But the words wouldn't come. Some details slipped through my fingers like sand. Moments I knew had happened, but now felt blurry and distant, like fragments of a fading dream. Other images, though, they sharpened in my mind with disturbing clarity. Children locked in small white rooms, needles and tubes, organs being transplanted, not between humans, but across species. Beings with no name, no origin, not human, not alien. Something in between, something worse. These hybrids. Some of them looked more human than anything I saw on level B3. So human, they could be walking the streets, working a job, smiling at a barista, and no one would know. They weren't building weapons down there. They were building replacements, but for what? For whom? A chill went through me, not just of fear, but recognition. Like some part of me already knew the answer. I just couldn't let it surface. The next morning, before I could return to the facility, Dr. Webb found me. I spotted him standing in the gravel lot outside the Desert Rose Diner, looking like he hadn't slept. His clothes were wrinkled, his face pale, eyes bloodshot. "You went back," he said, not asking, just stating it. I had to. "No," he replied quietly. "You chose to, and that choice, it's going to have consequences." He glanced around and jerked his head toward his car. "Come on, there are things you need to know." We took the back roads, winding up through the hills and into the mountains. The air got thinner, cooler, quieter. Eventually, we pulled into a scenic overlook, one of those tourist spots with wooden railings and faded plaques. From there, you could see everything: the scrubland, the long shadow of Archuleta Mesa, and, somewhere beneath it, that place. Webb killed the engine, let the silence settle. "The facility's been active since 1947, he said, his voice low, almost reverent. "Started as a military-civilian research program. Materials science, propulsion, tech, stuff recovered from non-standard sources." "Non-standard?" I asked. He shot me a look. "Let's not play dumb. You've seen enough to guess the truth." He lit a cigarette. His hands shook. As the research expanded, they kept digging, building deeper levels. Eventually, the cooperation started. Cooperation? Partnership, maybe. They needed our biological diversity. We wanted their tech. Seemed like a fair trade. He took a shaky drag. Mutually beneficial, carefully managed. But relationships, like that, they never stay stable. Not when you're dealing with beings you can't fully understand. I stared out at the mesa, throat dry. What happened in 1979? He went quiet. Then, a disagreement. He let the word hang. The human teams wanted to push the genetic integration project, make hybrids that could develop faster, stronger, smarter. The partners, they wanted limits, strict controls. They believed we weren't ready to decide what our evolution should look like, and we disagreed. We said it was our right, our future. They said we didn't have the wisdom to choose. He looked at me, hollow-eyed. It got ugly. Words turned to threats. Threats turned into a firefight. I blinked. A firefight? With what weapons? Not bullets. Those didn't work. Their defense systems made conventional firearms useless. But they had a weakness, certain electromagnetic frequencies. We found ways to exploit that. Still, they had their own weapons. Smarter ones. He let out a long, tired breath. How many died? Officially? No one. It never happened. The incident was erased, buried, but off the record. He hesitated. 68 human personnel. Could have been more. As for them, we never got a full count. And the facility? Sealed. Some levels permanently. Survivors were reassigned, memory wiped. They told the public it was decommissioned. But it wasn't. Too much money involved. Too much to gain. So they changed the management. Brought in new people. Tightened security. Security? I asked. He flicked ash from his cigarette and turned to face me fully. Genetic tagging. Behavioral programming. Memory modification. Anyone assigned. There, after 79, got tagged. Tiny, microscopic edits to their DNA. It let them track you, monitor your brain waves, your thoughts, your dreams. I stared at him, cold sweat running down my back. Are you saying they can control the people who work there? I'm saying they can influence them, he said. Steer their decisions, nudge their behavior. If someone becomes a risk, they can be corrected, activated. I felt a sick twist in my stomach. Activated? You ever feel something strange? He asked. Like a dream that wasn't yours, a thought that came out of nowhere, like something inside you was watching. I couldn't answer, because the truth was, I had, and I wasn't sure if those thoughts were ever mine to begin with. They were installed during the debriefing process. Webb's voice was quiet, almost ashamed. A chill crept down my spine. Are you tagged? He looked out at the mesa, jaw tight. Probably. I've been having the dreams for 15 years now. Dreams about procedures I don't remember going through, about promises I don't remember making. And lately, they've been getting stronger. What kind of dreams? He lit another cigarette, the flame trembling slightly in the breeze. Instructions, coordinates, preparations for something they call Phase 3. The words hung there like smoke between us. Webb flicked the cigarette out the window and exhaled slowly. I think they're getting ready to reopen the lower levels. Not for research this time, for implementation. Implementation of what? I asked, already fearing the answer. Integration, on a global scale. The hybrid program was never meant to stay underground. That place was just the prototype. A test run. Now they're ready to take it worldwide. I stared at the mesa, trying to swallow the knot rising in my throat. Suddenly, it all made sense. Why I had been hired. Why my background had been a perfect fit. It wasn't about my technical expertise. It was about my profile. Right clearances, right history, right mental conditioning. I wasn't being brought in as an employee. I was being recruited as a subject. The next morning, I tried to quit. called Morrison from the motel. "I'm done," I said. "There's been a family emergency. I need to leave town immediately." There was a pause. Then Morrison replied, his voice colder than I'd ever heard it, stripped of inflection, like a bad AI impersonation. "I'm afraid that's not possible. Your contract specifies the completion of all assigned tasks before termination is allowed." "What tasks?" I asked. "I was brought on to maintain comms equipment. That's finished." "There are additional tasks," he said flatly. "You'll receive new work orders this afternoon." "I'm not doing any more tasks," I snapped. "I'm leaving today." There was a longer silence. "Check your bank account, Mr. Hayes." I hung up immediately and called my bank. All my accounts had been frozen. The voice on the other end said there was a pending federal investigation. "Security violations," she said vaguely. No more details, but I couldn't access a single cent. No money for gas. No way to check out of the motel. I couldn't even buy a bus ticket. I was trapped. The work orders arrived that afternoon, delivered by one of the men from the black SUVs. He was tall, expressionless, and wearing the same kind of matte black uniform I'd seen at the facility gates. Instead of routine maintenance, the order requested a full diagnostic of the underground communication systems, across all 7 levels. "This isn't what I signed up for," I told the courier. He glanced at the tablet in his hands. "Mr. Hayes," he said, his voice flat, too flat, just like Morrison's. "Your cooperation is essential to national security. Any attempt to violate the terms of your contract will result in permanent reassignment to duties more suited to your capabilities." My heart skipped. "What does that mean?" He smiled, but it was wrong. The kind of smile that looked like someone had studied it, mimicked it, but never actually understood why people smiled. "It means you should complete your assigned tasks." That night, I made my move. I packed a bag, left what little cash I had on the motel desk, and slipped out under the cover of darkness. I started walking toward the highway, hoping to catch a ride out of town. I didn't care where. I just needed to be gone. But I never made it. I woke up the next morning in my motel bed, clothes changed, no memory of how I'd gotten there. My car keys were on the nightstand. Next to them was a handwritten note, written in my own handwriting. "Completed surface analysis. Beginning subsurface evaluation tomorrow. Integration proceeding as planned." I hadn't written that. At least, not consciously. My hands trembled as I read the words again. Something was wrong, inside me. I wasn't in control anymore. It was as if my body had been placed on autopilot, carrying out instructions I didn't understand. The next morning, I returned to the facility, not because I wanted to, but because something deep in me compelled it. I went through the motions, like a machine, taking the elevator down 1 level at a time. B1, B2, B3, deeper, all the way to B5. That's where I found the lab. Rows of glowing pods, humming softly. Inside them, floating in synthetic amniotic fluid, were children. Dozens of them, each one subtly different from the others. Variations in facial structure, skin tone, hair, height, custom built for their eventual roles. Replacements. I stepped closer to one of the pods, and recognition hit me like a hammer. The child inside looked eerily similar to a young congressional aide I'd seen on the news. Another pod, an actor, a well-known activist. Their replacements were already being grown, their faces duplicated, their speech patterns studied. On B6, I found the conditioning rooms. There, the hybrids were grown, fully formed, dressed, taught. They practiced smiling, arguing, crying, holding a cup of coffee just right. They watched endless hours of video footage, imitating their targets until the mimicry was flawless. They were studying humanity like actors preparing for a role, a performance that wouldn't end. But what chilled me most was what I found on the lowest level, B7. There, behind thick glass walls and biometric locks, were the originals, the partners. They didn't try to hide what they were, and they weren't human. They were larger than I'd expected. Taller, yes, but not monstrous. Graceful even. Their movements were fluid, almost mesmerizing, and their eyes, held a depth I can't describe. It was like looking into the intelligence of something ancient, older than human civilization, older than our myths. They didn't speak, they didn't need to. They communicated directly, mind to mind. Thoughts, feelings, ideas flowed between them effortlessly, like waves in a current. And then they noticed me. I felt it instantly. Their attention hit me like a weight pressing on my chest. Not malicious, not kind, just heavy, clinical, observing, calculating. They studied me the way a surgeon studies an X-ray before deciding whether to cut. In that moment, I knew I was a subject, not a person. They made decisions about me, about my future, and I wasn't invited into that conversation. I felt it, something inside me, shifting. That's when they began the process, the forgetting. But something didn't work. Maybe it was my military training. Maybe my brain chemistry reacted unpredictably. Maybe I just got lucky. But the memory modification didn't stick. Not entirely. I woke up 3 days later in a sterile hospital room, the air sharp with disinfectant. Air Force Medical Facility, Colorado Springs. A man in a white coat told me I'd been found wandering alone in the desert near Dulce, delirious, dehydrated, mumbling nonsense. They said I'd had a psychotic break. Hallucinations, stress, extreme exposure. My contract was terminated. Medical concerns, my security clearance suspended. My bank accounts were unlocked, but there was no record, none, of any assignment to Dulce in my employment history. According to the official paperwork, I was never there. That was 26 years ago. I disappeared for a while after that, took odd jobs, nothing that required a background check, nothing that tied me to anything official. I moved frequently, changed names, I stayed under the radar. I told myself it was trauma, a breakdown. I convinced myself I'd cracked under pressure, that years of classified ops had finally caught up with me. But the dreams never stopped. Every night, I heard that low humming, the sound of something enormous breathing beneath the earth. I saw those hybrid children again floating in tanks, faces smooth and expressionless. I saw replacement humans, identical to the originals, being trained to mimic, to blend in. Plans, decades-long plans, carefully orchestrated. Every continent, every government. And slowly, I started to see them. In the real world, people in high places, politicians, executives, tech leaders, whose reactions felt off. Not wrong exactly, just too perfect, too measured. Their eyes didn't match their smiles. Their empathy felt like mimicry. And the more I paid attention, the more patterns I noticed. Technological breakthroughs that pushed us toward constant connectivity. Social movements that, on the surface, seemed organic, but felt oddly synchronized. Political decisions that, when mapped together, formed a blueprint, a slow, methodical shift. This isn't an invasion. It's integration, not a war, a replacement. One by one, key individuals are being swapped, not with monsters or body snatchers, but with something that looks, acts, and thinks almost like us. Almost, I know how this sounds. Believe me, I do. Paranoia, mental illness, some long-brewing psychotic break. That would be the logical explanation, wouldn't it? But the evidence, it's everywhere. Old forum threads, redacted government documents that were leaked, then buried, and the signals, the transmissions. I've spent years scanning frequencies, isolating anomalies. The same patterns, over and over, coming from beneath Dulce. And the people, more and more every year. Former employees, contractors, whistleblowers, coming forward with stories like mine, describing the same tunnels, the same memories, the same haunted feeling that something happened down there that none of us were supposed to survive. Phil Schneider. He tried to talk. He died under suspicious circumstances. Others vanished. Others were ruined. But the story won't die, because some part of us knows, deep down, something is wrong with the world. Something is changing and we're not in control anymore. I'm speaking now because I don't have much time left. Cancer, the doctors say. Stage 4. Maybe it's just bad luck, or maybe it's something else. Something silencing the ones who know too much. Before I go, I want this on the record. I want someone, anyone, to know what I saw, what I experienced, what I remember, despite all the attempts to erase it. The documents are real. I've hidden copies. In safe deposit boxes, with lawyers I trust, people with instructions, contingency plans. If you're hearing this, it's already begun. If anything happens to me, I need someone to know. The frequency logs are real. For 26 years, I've been monitoring transmissions coming from beneath Archuleta Mesa. Strange signals, too structured to be noise, too consistent to be natural. You probably wouldn't even notice them unless you knew what to listen for. But once you do, once your ears are tuned to that rhythm, that pulse, you start to hear it everywhere. The integration is real, and it's speeding up. Now that you know, you'll start noticing them. The people who move a little too deliberately, who blink at the wrong time, who laugh when no one else is laughing, or don't react at all when something horrible is said. People whose smiles stop just short of their eyes. They're not monsters. They're not malicious. In fact, I think many of them believe they're helping, that they're guiding us towards some better version of the future. A future they think we're too primitive, too self-destructive to build ourselves. But they're not us, and the future they're creating, it isn't the one we would have chosen. Now, as I lie here, in this dark, sterile room, I hear that humming again. Stronger than ever. Not imagined, not a symptom of the tumor pressing against my brain. Real. Like the earth itself is exhaling, beneath me. Something deep under the mesa is waking up. This is what Webb warned me about. He called it the next phase. I used to think he was paranoid. Now I know he was right. I hear it in my dreams now. That sound. In the spaces between thoughts, in the silence between heartbeats. It's not just sound, it's presence, vast, ancient, and inhuman. A breath syncing itself with mine, waiting for a moment I can't define. If you're near New Mexico, don't follow the lights. They're not for you. And if you're driving past Archuleta Mesa on a moonless night, and you see strange illumination, coming from beneath the ground, keep driving. Don't stop. Don't investigate. Some knowledge is too dangerous to carry. Some truths are safer buried. But if you can't help yourself, if curiosity overtakes caution, and you find that elevator, the one hidden in the rock, and you descend into the depths beneath the mesa, remember this, integration works both ways. Yes, they change us, but we change them too. Maybe that's the point. Maybe that's why I was brought there in the first place. Not just to observe, not just to forget, but to alter something, to introduce a variable they hadn't accounted for. Maybe that's why I remember. Maybe that's why I'm still here to say all this. So sleep well, night wanderers, and if you dream of a low humming sound and shadows that breathe, don't be afraid. It's probably nothing. Probably. But now, another story beckons. A different kind of mystery. One written not beneath the desert, but deep below the ocean's surface. Tension builds again, this time in the icy silence of the North Atlantic. A curious anomaly, a warning missed, and the first steps of a cover-up stretching back generations. Our guide is Dr. Nolan Reeves, a quiet, brilliant marine biologist with no intention of chasing conspiracies. But fate, as always, has other plans. What began as a routine deep-sea survey of microbial decay on the wreck of the Titanic quickly turns into something else, something much darker. Reeves found himself aboard the Aegis, a lean research vessel with just enough room for his modest team. No glamour, no press, just him, a few dedicated marine scientists, and a deep-diving submersible called Deep Seeker. His mission? Study the rusticles, those strange, icicle-like formations of iron-eating bacteria steadily consuming the ship's remains. A long, slow death for the grandest ship ever built. But something didn't add up. Alongside him was Isa Grant, a sharp-eyed pilot with a habit of spotting things others missed. She was the first to point out the irregularities, gouges in the hull that didn't match the known damage patterns, clean slices as though made by cutting tools, not the chaotic trauma of an iceberg. And then there was the funding. Their backer, Andrew Cedar, claimed to represent a historical preservation foundation, but the Institute's paperwork was vague, and his demands were oddly specific: retrieve certain artifacts, scan specific chambers, transmit findings directly to encrypted servers. No academic sharing, no transparency. Reeves grew uneasy, especially when their equipment began to glitch only near certain areas of the wreck, especially when Isa recorded what looked like a sealed bulkhead that wasn't on any of the original ship's blueprints, one with faint illumination bleeding from its edges, a door, still powered. Then people started getting hurt. Accidents, loose cables, malfunctioning pressure locks, systems going dead for minutes at a time. Isa's sub lost contact for 22 minutes. When she came back, she didn't talk for hours, and Reeves began to hear things. Not just through the hydrophones, in his head. Like whispers moving just beneath language. Like a dream spoken in sonar. Now he's racing to gather proof. Piece together this puzzle before it swallows him whole. There are agents, he's sure of it, people trying to stop him, maybe from the government, maybe from whoever funded this mission, or maybe something else entirely. This story, his story, is only beginning. In the 5 parts that follow, you'll see Dr. Reeves's journey unfold, from initial curiosity to full-blown paranoia, from scholarly doubt to terrifying realization. Was the sinking of the Titanic really an accident, or was it the beginning of something that still waits in the deep? Make yourself comfortable, dim the lights, and listen closely. Because the hum you hear in the distance might not be your imagination, it might be something waking up. Again. Ree and Grant stood side by side on the steel deck, the sharp sea air stinging their cheeks as gulls circled above. The EG's ship, sleek, cold, and brimming with silent personnel, hovered steadily in the Atlantic swell near the Titanic's final resting place. This was no ordinary expedition. The mission brief said it was to collect microbial samples, assess the ship's structural integrity, and shoot documentary footage for an educational series. Straightforward stuff, on paper. But Reeve felt something was off. That nagging sense had been growing ever since they'd been selected. He didn't say anything to Grant yet, but something about Sir, the project's reclusive billionaire backer, didn't sit right. Sir rarely appeared in public, but his fascination with the Titanic bordered on obsession. He had poured millions into the expedition, demanded hourly updates, and, strangely, fixated on high-resolution images of very specific sections of the hull. His interest didn't feel scientific. It felt personal. On a crisp morning, as dawn split the horizon in pale golds and silvers, the mechanical whine of the winches echoed across the deck. The submersible, Deep Seeker, hung suspended over the waves, steam rising off its metallic belly. Reeve double-checked the seals on his pressure suit, then climbed inside the tight titanium sphere that formed the cockpit. Grant followed, sliding into the seat beside him. "You good?" Grant asked, glancing over. "Yeah." "You?" Reeve replied, adjusting the oxygen feed on his vest. "Ready to meet a ghost," Grant said with a dry grin. The submersible was gently lowered into the sea. Water swallowed them whole, a shudder running through the vessel as pressure built. The soft hum of filtered air filled the cramped space. Outside, darkness thickened. The only light came from the green glow of the instrument dials and the cold, sweep of the sub's exterior lamps cutting through the deep black like a knife. 2 hours into the descent, the bow emerged, gradual, like a memory surfacing. The Titanic's forward section appeared from the gloom, her steel bones broken but unmistakable. Silt clung to her ribs. Coral and sea life had made homes in her scars. And yet, in that silent ruin, something sacred remained. Reeves stared out, the porthole, heart tightening in his chest. "It's like looking at a cathedral that fell from the sky," he whispered. Grant said nothing. He just slowed their pace, letting them drift gently along the starboard side. Using the sub's robotic arm, Grant collected rusticles from the outer wall. Reeves sealed the samples into labelled containers with practiced care. They moved forward, recording video through once lavish corridors, now collapsed and half buried in sediment. The debris swirled lazily around them, giving everything the soft blur of a dream or a memory fading away. Then something strange happened. "Hold up," Grant said, eyes narrowed at her monitor. "You seeing that?" Reeve leaned over. "What?" "Near the stern lower deck. That plating there. It's weird." They guided the sub closer. The outer wall showed an odd bulge, metal warped outward in a shallow dome, rimmed with faint scorch marks. "That doesn't look like tearing," Reeve muttered. "It looks like an explosion from inside." Grant nodded slowly. "Exactly what I was thinking." Reeves' pulse quickened. "But that doesn't make sense. The official records, every simulation says the iceberg tore from the outside. In." He stared through the viewport, watching the jagged steel edge. It was unmistakably bent outward. The scorch marks were subtle, like shadows, but they were there, and the metal looked darker, maybe oxidized or burnt. He took several high-res photos and radioed the surface. "This is Reeve. We've found an anomaly, damage inconsistent with the standard iceberg impact pattern, possibly internal." "Copy. That," the voice replied, curt and clipped. "Stick to the assigned grid." Reeve blinked. That was unusual. Normally, the deck crew reacted with excitement to new finds. This felt like a dismissal. Something's off, he thought again. They kept going. More anomalies emerged. A sealed-off cargo hold with no record in the ship's known blueprints. Warped support beams that twisted in strange angles. Not the kind of stress patterns ice caused. Then they saw something even stranger. Embedded in one of the inner compartments was a chunk of metal. Darker, smoother, and unlike anything else, on the ship. It looked almost fused into the surrounding structure. Grant frowned. "It doesn't look like Titanic steel." "No, it doesn't," Reeve agreed. "Might be a fragment from something else. Equipment. A device." Grant maneuvered the arm, carefully extracting the piece and placing it in a sample locker. The object made a heavy thunk as it dropped into the container. Reeve couldn't stop thinking. Every piece they found pointed away from the accepted story. Was there something else on board that night? Something explosive? A cargo no one ever admitted to? Their mission timer buzzed. Time to ascend. As the sub broke the surface and was hoisted back onto the ship, Reeve wiped condensation from his visor and stepped onto the deck. Sir was already there, standing near the hatch in his usual long coat, hands tucked into his pockets. He offered a faint smile. "Any interesting finds?" he asked, tone light. Reeve hesitated, glancing at Grant. "We noticed some unusual damage. Internal warping. Burn patterns. Doesn't quite fit the official story." Sir's smile faltered for a split second, then returned. "I see," he said calmly. "Well, let me know if you find anything else out of place." Then he turned and walked away, leaving only the echo of his footsteps and a growing sense of unease in Reeves' gut. That evening, after Sir's brief and strangely dismissive response, Reeve couldn't shake the unease gnawing at his chest. He sat hunched over a workstation in the ship's dimly lit lab, the quiet hum of the generators in the background. The screens glowed with freeze frames from their dive, scorch marks, twisted steel bending outward, and structural anomalies that simply didn't belong. He replayed the footage again and again, eyes narrowing at the faint burn patterns and the unnatural bulge in the hull. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered to himself. The Titanic had sunk in 1912. Everyone knew the story. An iceberg, a glancing blow, a series of flooded compartments, and a tragic loss of life. The world had mourned and moved on. But here he was, staring at something that directly contradicted that century-old narrative. Isa entered quietly, her expression mirroring his tension. She crossed the narrow lab and stood behind him, arms folded. "You're still going through it," she said. Reeve nodded. "I can't stop thinking about it. This damage, it looks like an explosion from inside the ship." She leaned over the monitor, studying the images. If the Titanic was sabotaged or scuttled, that would mean... She trailed off, the weight of it hanging in the air. "That there was a cover-up," Reeve finished. "Something huge, something deliberate." Isa shook her head slowly. "It's nearly unimaginable. But these images, they don't lie." Reeve nodded, lips pressed, into a tight line. "We need more context. Maybe shipping records, survivor testimonies, anything that can back this up." He sent out discreet emails to colleagues back on the mainland, historians, archivists, anyone he trusted. He asked them to cross-reference the Titanic's structural plans with what they'd found. He kept his tone casual, but the questions were loaded. What Reeve didn't know was that others were already watching. Later that night, as the ship lay quiet under a blanket of stars and most of the crew slept, a figure in a standard E-Guest staff uniform slipped silently into the lab. The person moved with precision, not touching anything unnecessarily. They inserted a small device into the main console, scanned the recent footage logs, and began quietly encrypting the raw data. Then they vanished as quickly as they'd come. The next morning, Reeve returned to the lab, rubbing sleep from his eyes, ready to continue reviewing the footage. But something was wrong. Every time he tried to open a file, an error message popped up. "Access denied, encrypted file, passcode required." He frowned, tried again. Same message. What the hell? Isa looked over from the adjacent station. "Glitch?" "Too convenient. To be a glitch," he said. He brought it up with Sarah over a tense breakfast. The sponsor's response was quick, practiced. "Probably just a systems hiccup. We'll get IT on it." "No need to alarm the team," Sir said, sipping his coffee. "Focus on collecting fresh data." But Reeve heard the edge in Sir's voice. It was too calm, too directed, and far too eager to sweep it under the rug. Back in the lab, he and Isa worked with what they still had. Screenshots saved to her personal camera, fragments of the data that hadn't been scrubbed. The scorch pattern was still visible, clear and undeniable. Reeve pulled up the Titanic's original construction blueprints from the Maritime Historical Society's archives. The area where they saw the explosion. Just standard plating, no indication of additional compartments, no unusual reinforcements. "So where did this come from?" he muttered. Isa glanced up. "Someone added something after the fact? Or hid something?" Reeve contacted one of his oldest friends, Francis Hobbs, a maritime historian who specialized in transatlantic liners. Hobbs called back within the hour, his voice tinged with disbelief. "An internal explosion," Hobbs said. "That's insane, Nolan. There's never been any mention of that in the official inquiries. Every major study blames the iceberg and poor compartmentalization." Reeve explained further, mentioning fringe theories that the Titanic's sister ship, Olympic, had been damaged weeks before Titanic's maiden voyage. Some believed the White Star Line had swapped the ships to claim insurance. Hobbs sighed. "Yeah, I've read those theories, but no one ever suggested sabotage or bombs. If your footage is real, you're kicking a hornet's nest, Nolan." He already knew. More things started going wrong. Segments of audio from the submersible's recordings were missing. The expedition's official logbooks were suddenly being edited. Hull anomalies described simply as natural corrosion. Sear then made an announcement. The research focus was shifting. From now on, they'd be mapping the upper decks. No, more dives near the stern or the lower compartments. That was the last straw. Reeve confronted Sear in the corridor, jaw tight, fists clenched. "We're not finished," he said. "We came to study microbial decay across the full wreck. You can't just change the mission halfway through." Sear gave him a gentle smile and patted his shoulder. "This is my expedition, Dr. Reeve. We have everything we need. Let's not waste time chasing shadows." He walked off without another word. Reeve stared after him, fury rising in his chest. He didn't believe for a second this was about efficiency. Sear was hiding something, and Reeve had just gotten too close. That night, Issa quietly confided in him. "I saw someone in the lab," she whispered. "Not one of ours. They were going through the computers around 3 a.m. Didn't even notice me." Reeve's eyes narrowed. "Then we're being watched, maybe even sabotaged." They agreed on a plan. On their next dive, they'd pretend to follow orders, standard microbial survey, basic scans. But once below, they'd break protocol, revisit the damaged hull, record new footage, and store it all on an external drive not connected to the ship's systems. "If this is real," Issa said, looking him in the eye, "we need proof, hard, physical proof." Reeve nodded. "Then we go deeper, one more time." They planned to smuggle the footage out the next day. That morning, Issa slipped a backup camera into the sub's toolkit, an old model modified to look like part of the equipment. While the others prepped for the dive, she quietly activated it, capturing alternate angles of the wreckage, especially the odd scorch marks near the collapsed beams. Things went fine until near the end of the dive. Without warning, the sub's thrusters stuttered and died. The lights blinked out. For a terrifying moment, they were suspended in total blackness, drifting in the crushing silence of the deep Atlantic. "Shit." "Rebooting," Issa whispered, her hands flying over the emergency console. Reeve held his breath, heart pounding. At this depth, a loss of propulsion could mean death. Then, whirring, Issa's backup system kicked in. The thrusters sputtered back to life. Lights returned. They didn't speak for the rest of the ascent. The official post-dive report later blamed a mechanical fault, just one of those things that can go wrong in deep-sea ops. But neither Reeve nor Issa bought it. The sub had been checked thoroughly that morning. It felt too precise, too targeted. Reeve muttered what they were both thinking. Sabotage. Back on the surface, in the cramped quarters of the research ship Aegis, they pored over their footage, reviewing angles, comparing notes. Reeve was fixated on the scorch patterns, outward bends in steel, blackened seams. It suggested an internal explosion. But how? Everyone knew the Titanic struck an iceberg. But the more they dug into survivor memoirs, the more cracks appeared in that old narrative. Several survivors had reported hearing loud, thunderous booms hours before the collision, deep below deck. Officially, these had been written off as boiler ruptures caused by flooding, but one account stood out. A woman had written that John Astor, the wealthy industrialist, had once confided in a friend about shadowy financial dealings, deals tied to a global central banking system. He'd been opposed to it. Then came a peculiar line from an old steward's journal. "We were told not to speak of the cargo in hold number 3, said it was hush-hush, for the men in suits." Reeve stared at the words for a long time. Mail and supplies didn't get labelled hush-hush. Not like that. A pattern began to take shape, grim and slow. Men known to oppose the formation of a centralized global banking system had died on the Titanic. Others, powerful figures in favor of it, had cancelled their bookings at the last moment. Coincidence? Reeve's rational mind fought back. It was wild. It sounded like the kind of thing people posted on conspiracy forums. But the evidence in their hands, burn marks, Structural damage inconsistent with an iceberg collision, witness statements that had been dismissed for decades, made the conspiracy harder to ignore. As the expedition neared its scheduled end, tension built on the Aegis. CER, the corporate sponsor of the mission, seemed eager to pack it up. Some staff began whispering about strange instructions from Calder's office, orders that didn't make sense, odd data requests, logs that vanished from the server. Reeve pulled Issa aside in the equipment bay, voices low. "They're going to bury this, Issa. Once we dock, CER will take everything and label it junk science or fringe nonsense." She nodded slowly, eyes scanning the corridor. "They're already watching us. Every time I upload footage, I get flagged. We're being monitored. We have to go public. Leak it. Publish. Something. People deserve to know." Issa hesitated, then said, "All right, but we do it smart." They worked late into the nights, pretending to catalogue debris. In truth, they were preparing. Reeve wrote a paper, part academic, part expose, detailing structural anomalies, the historical coincidences, and the unexplained cargo in Hold 3. Issa assembled a short documentary with voiceover and clips from the dive. They kept copies hidden on encrypted flash drives. But someone had noticed. An informant aboard Aegis had tipped off someone higher up. In the shadows behind CER was a darker organization, one with no logo, no official name, just a whispered term in certain research circles. The Black Archive. A few days before docking, a diver from Reeve's team died. Explosion aboard his private boat. Official cause, fuel leak. But Reeve knew the man. Methodical, precise. No way he'd have been sloppy. "This is a message," Reeve told Issa, his voice hollow. "Keep quiet or end up dead." It was no longer just about history. It was about silencing truth. Reeve felt the chill of something ancient and calculated pressing down on them, like a ghost of 1912 reaching forward through time to snuff out inconvenient questions. That night, he couldn't sleep. He kept rewriting, refining his report, trying to keep it factual, clean, irrefutable. The paper was now more than research. It was evidence. Then it came. An email from an unknown sender. No greeting, just one line. "Stop. We see you. Let the Titanic rest, or you'll join it." No signature. Just that. Reeve stared at the screen. A cold wave rolled through his gut. This wasn't a bluff. He closed the laptop slowly. The ocean outside the porthole was calm, endless, dark. But something was watching, and it wanted silence. He looked over at Issa asleep across the room, clutching one of the backup drives under her arm like a child might cling to a teddy bear. Despite everything, Reeve whispered to himself, "No more silence." The dead of the Titanic deserved no less than the truth. As dawn broke over the final day of the expedition, the Aegis began its slow return to port. The sea was calm, the sky smeared in soft hues of orange and pink, yet tension crackled through the salty air like static. CER personnel moved quietly but deliberately around the deck, securing storage bays, locking up data terminals, checking equipment logs. They were ensuring that all official findings were accounted for, by which Reeve knew they meant sanitized and sealed. Down below, in their shared cabin, Reeve and Issa sat across from each other, silent but alert. Between them lay a small black case containing flash drives, evidence they weren't supposed to have. The scorch marks on Titanic's steel beams, the disturbing survivor accounts, the strange historical coincidences, and the half-finished documentary they'd edited late into the nights. Reeve stared out the porthole, mind reeling. More than 1,500 people had died that night in 1912. If even a fraction of what they'd uncovered was true, if the sinking had been orchestrated, then those lives weren't just lost. They were taken. "I can't let them stay buried under some century-old lie," Reeve whispered. "We owe them more than that." Issa didn't answer. She just reached over and squeezed his hand. That morning, as the Aegis neared the harbour, Reeve stood on the stern deck. His eyes scanned the shoreline. The coastal city shimmered under the rising sun, a picture of peace and normalcy. Joggers on the boardwalk, taxis gliding past open cafes, fishermen prepping their gear. They had no idea that a conspiracy, possibly older than anyone alive, was about to surface, if Reeve and Issa survived long enough to reveal it. Inside, anxiety twisted in his gut. The Watchers, the men who had killed his colleague and sent that anonymous warning, might already be waiting, ready to intercept them, to erase everything. At breakfast, Andrew Calder stood before the crew with a casual smile. Once we dock, all expedition materials, logs, sonar data, camera footage, are to be handed over to CER for final review and archiving. Standard post-expedition procedure, he said lightly. Reeve met his eyes across the table. Calder's expression was pleasant, but there was a smugness behind it, the kind you see in a man who thinks the game is over and he's already won. Reeve gave a slow nod and went back to his toast, masking the pounding in his chest. He could feel Issa's gaze from the next table. She gave a tiny, imperceptible nod. They understood each other. They had to move. Below deck, Reeve and Issa ducked into the sub-storage room. From a hidden compartment under a tool tray, they retrieved the sealed case. Inside were the flash drives, the smoking guns. One contained images of the scorched and warped hull beams. Another had expert testimonies, cut off before they could finish. One held the documentary, rough, unpolished, but powerful. Issa slipped the waterproof case into the bottom of her duffel bag. They had a simple plan: avoid the main port, find a secure spot with internet, and upload everything. They also had a backup, an old contact in the press, a freelance investigative journalist with a reputation for chasing impossible stories. If they could get the files into her hands, the truth would be out. But the Watchers were one step ahead. As the Aegis drifted into dock, Reeve spotted them. A black SUV parked just beyond the loading zone. Two men stood beside it, in dark suits and mirrored sunglasses. They weren't crew, weren't harbour staff either. Their posture, their blank expressions, they didn't belong. Reeve recognized the type, ex-military or corporate security. Maybe Black Archive, maybe something even deeper. If he and Issa tried to leave with the rest of the team, they'd be intercepted. Maybe worse. "We can't go out with everyone else," Reeve muttered, stepping away from the window. "They're waiting." Issa was already thinking. "There's a cargo ramp on the starboard side," she said. "Smaller, used for unloading subgear. It's usually empty during docking." "If they're watching the main exit," Reeve said, "that's our shot." They waited until the crew began disembarking. Port workers moved around in organized chaos, hauling gear, shouting over engines, forklifts beeping. It was their best cover. Reeve and Issa pulled on plain jackets, stuffed what gear they could into a single backpack, and moved quickly but calmly to the cargo area. The ramp was already lowered for equipment offloading. No one stood watch. Heart pounding, Reeve glanced back toward the SUV. The two men were focused on the main walkway, scanning faces as the expedition team filed out. Good. They stepped onto the ramp and slipped down to the dock, boots hitting the concrete with soft thuds. Keeping their heads low, they moved through stacks of crates and coiled rope, blending in with the workers. They were halfway to the outer gate when someone shouted, "Hey, stop! Stop!" A man in an Aegis jacket sprinted toward them, hand on his, earpiece. His voice carried urgency, not confusion. He knew who they were. "Go!" Reeve hissed. They broke into a run, weaving between containers and startled workers. Behind them, the black suits snapped to life, moving fast. Issa pointed ahead. "Cabs! By the fence!" 3 yellow cabs idled near the port gate, engines running. They bolted. Reeve's lungs burned, but adrenaline drowned out the pain. A worker cursed as Issa brushed past him. nearly toppling a handcart. Behind them, the suited men closed in, fast, trained, no hesitation. Split at the taxis, Issa said. They'll have to choose. Reeve gave her a sharp look. You sure? Trust me. They hit the edge of the lot and broke in opposite directions. One cab, one chance, and everything to lose. Issa gasped, her breath catching in her throat. As they hurried forward, a second black SUV screeched to a halt in front of them. A tall man in a dark coat stepped out and stood squarely in their path. Shit, Reeve muttered under his breath. The watchers were closing in from both sides now. Their faces were blank, movements coordinated, too rehearsed to be anything but professional. Panic surged through Reeve's chest. Without thinking, he veered off the main path and darted behind a forklift. The driver, startled, nearly dropped the heavy crates he was carrying. Hey, what the hell? Issa didn't hesitate. She jumped up onto the step of the forklift and shouted, Please, just move, swing around to block them. The driver blinked, confused, but then instinctively obeyed. The forklift jerked forward with a sputtering whine, clumsily pivoting and cutting off at least two of the advancing watchers. They paused, clearly reluctant to cause a scene in front of witnesses. Reeve's eyes scanned the area frantically. To the left, a narrow alley, half concealed behind stacked pallets. There! He yelled. He and Issa leapt from the forklift and bolted into the alley, their shoes slapping against the wet concrete. Behind them, the watchers shouted and gave chase. Reeve's pulse thundered in his ears. His grip tightened around the bag slung over his shoulder. The flash drives inside felt heavier than gold. Every second mattered. They sprinted through the maze-like streets of the industrial zone, shadows stretching across rusting containers and graffiti-stained walls. The watchers weren't far behind. He could hear their boots pounding, their voices barking in clipped, urgent tones. Ahead, they spotted a small metal door set into the side of a dilapidated warehouse. Issa yanked it open and they slipped inside, letting it clang shut behind them. The inside was dim and thick with the musty smell of fish meal and salt, the air tinged with rust and mold. Old maritime supplies lay scattered around in forgotten crates. Issa fumbled with her phone, fingers trembling, as she typed out a message. Need immediate pickup. Coordinates near Old Fish Warehouse. Being chased. She hit send and whispered, Please go through. Please. Outside, footsteps slowed. Muffled voices. They knew. There wasn't time to hide properly. The door burst open with a metallic bang. Short scuffle broke out. Issa grabbed a wrench off a nearby table, swinging it defensively as the watchers surged inside. Reeve dove behind a crate, heart hammering. One of the watchers raised a gun, pointing it straight at him. Drop the bag, the man growled. Reeve froze, mind spinning. If they got that evidence, it was over. All of it. Then, headlights. A blinding white beam cut through the dirty windows. A van screeched to a stop just outside, brake lights glowing red in the fog. At the same moment, another door slammed open. At the rear of the warehouse, a man burst in, wiry, sharp-eyed, holding a high-powered camera. He lifted it and fired the flash. The sudden burst of light disoriented the watchers. "Carl!" Issa shouted. In that instant of chaos, Reeve and Issa scrambled for cover. Gunfire exploded, bullets ricocheting off metal crates and splintering wood. "This way!" Carl yelled. They followed him through a hole in the back wall. The watchers recovered quickly, shouting and firing, but the trio dove into the van. Tires squealed as they peeled away. A final shot cracked through the rear windshield, spraying glass, but they were already rounding the corner. Reeve clutched the bag, his breath ragged. "How did you find us so fast?" I was nearby chasing. "A lead," Carl barked, swerving between tight industrial roads. "Your message looked like code red. Now tell me, what the hell's in that bag?" Issa leaned forward, voice low and urgent. "Proof of sabotage from the Titanic wreck. There's been a cover-up for over 100 years. These guys, the Watchers, are part of some shadow network that wants to bury it forever." Carl's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. Jesus. All right, we'll go somewhere safe. Then, we make it public. They ended up at an abandoned warehouse on the edge of the city, run down, but with good sight lines in all directions. It wasn't much, but it was defensible. Inside, behind locked doors, Carl yanked a tarp off an old generator and fired it up with a choke and a roar. The trio set up a battered laptop Carl used for fieldwork. Reeve plugged in the flash drives, hands still trembling. The screen flickered to life. The data was intact, crisp, high-res images, scorch marks on the Titanic's hull, structural anomalies, and transcripts from submersible dives referencing sealed compartments never mentioned in any official logs. Enough to raise serious questions, Carl muttered, hunched over the laptop. Maybe not ironclad proof, but enough to get attention. He started uploading the files to a secure server. The progress bar crawled forward, agonizingly slow. The Wi-Fi here's garbage, Carl growled. Reeve paced in the background, anxiety rising. He knew they were on borrowed time. Then, a chime. The upload froze. The screen blinked. Connection lost. Issa let out a curse. They're jamming us, or killing the local network. They tried Carl's backup phone hotspot. No luck. It was locked out, disabled remotely. They're everywhere, Carl muttered. This isn't just a few thugs. They've got infrastructure. What do we do? Reeve asked, his voice tight. Carl stared at the screen, then said, We go live. No more slow uploads. We stream this, blast it out to every mirror we've got. Once it's out there, it replicates too fast for them to shut it down. Issa nodded. Do it. Reeve looked down at the flash drives in his lap, then back at Carl. His voice was calm now, steady. Let's make sure the world sees it. But they needed more than just a signal. They needed stability, vantage, distance, breathing room. Somewhere the watchers couldn't reach, couldn't jam. Out at sea seemed their best bet. As dusk settled over the city like a slow-burning fuse, their plans solidified. Charter a boat, push out beyond the nearshore jamming radius, and go live. Reveal the truth. Roll the dice. It was a huge risk, but Reeve knew one thing. On open water, the watchers couldn't close in as easily. They'd have nowhere to hide either, but at least they wouldn't be cornered like rats. They would make their move at dawn. What they didn't know was that another black SUV had quietly found the warehouse not long after they left. It's tinted. Windows caught the glint of streetlights. 3 men stepped out, silent and deliberate, their movements calm and lethal. In mere hours, the final showdown would begin. And whether the world learned the truth about the Titanic would come down to a matter of seconds. The sky was a bruised grey when Reeve, Issa Grant and Carl Dawson crept along a rickety dock toward a battered fishing boat named Sea Pearl. They had spent the night on the run, switching cars, changing routes, paying cash for silence. Issa had even bribed a half-awake fisherman with a handful of crisp bills and 0 questions asked. The watcher's net was tightening, but the trio's resolve was unshaken. A cold wind knifed across the bay as they loaded their gear. Carl's Oldfield laptop, a portable satellite uplink borrowed from a storm-chasing friend, and the bag with the flash drives, now almost sacred in Reeve's eyes. The fisherman, a wiry man with a greying beard and a cigarette clamped between his lips, gave them one last skeptical glance. He didn't ask questions. The money had been good. With a sputter and groan, Sea Pearl's old engine rumbled to life. They pulled away from the dock, the dark city shrinking behind them. Salt spray hit their faces like a slap. Issa sat cross-legged, beside the uplink, carefully calibrating it to link with a global streaming platform. The plan was simple: send the broadcast to multiple mirror sites at once. Kill one, and another would survive. Like cutting the head off a hydra, it wouldn't be enough. Carl adjusted a backup camera, his hands steady. Reeve sat stiffly in the boat's middle seat, the evidence resting in his lap. The cold metal of the zipper against his thumb grounded him. He wasn't a spy, wasn't a fighter. He was just a marine biologist. But something about the wreck had changed him. The Titanic's remains had whispered secrets to him beneath 12,000 feet of ocean. It hadn't felt like history. It had felt like a message, deliberately buried. And now, that message had to be heard. They reached about 15 miles offshore, just as the sun began to lift the sky into a pink haze. The sea rocked gently beneath them, wind moaning through, the boat's antennae. The horizon stretched wide, empty, quiet. No sign of pursuit. Isa gave a firm nod. Signals clean. Reeve exhaled. Carl powered up the laptop and brought up the streaming interface. It was bare bones, nothing flashy, just a simple window and a single connection line. Ready? Carl asked, glancing at them both. Reeve nodded. Do it, Carl whispered the countdown. 3, 2, 1. We're live. The laptop's green light blinked. The satellite uplink held steady. On screens across the world, the feed began. Reeve leaned into the camera. The wind ruffled his hair. His heart pounded in his throat. But he spoke. Good morning. My name is Dr. Nolan Reeve. I'm a marine biologist with the Boers Institute, and I'm broadcasting today under urgent circumstances. This message concerns the RMS Titanic. He swallowed. You've been told the Titanic struck an iceberg, that it was an accident, an unfortunate chapter in maritime history. But that isn't the full story. After participating in a deep-sea expedition, I personally observed anomalies, damage that didn't align with a simple collision. He paused to click the laptop. A slide appeared in the stream. Photos of the scorched hull, steel bent outward, not inward. These scorch marks, they're consistent with controlled internal detonations. Explosives, not ice. He clicked again. We found sealed compartments never logged in the ship's original blueprints. We uncovered manipulated shipping manifests. And certain influential passengers, men who were public opponents of the creation of a central global financial system, were aboard that night and died. Reeve glanced sideways at Isa, who loaded the next files. A collection of aged telegrams, yellowed paper scanned into digital clarity. These documents reference something called Project White Star. Yes, the same name as the Titanic's parent company, but context suggests something else, something secret. Carl adjusted the camera angle. You're doing good, he murmured. Reeve pressed on. We believe an early version of what today we might call a black archive was behind this, an organization with deep generational power. They didn't just want to sink a ship, they wanted to silence opposition, redirect history. Isa pulled up another document, an internal memo written just weeks before the launch. It hinted at structural vulnerabilities to be exploited. At sea and all key players secured. This wasn't an accident, Reeve said. It was a message. He let the final images roll. Sonar scans of the wreckage, dives noting unexplained damage patterns, audio logs from ROV missions. Then he leaned back, visibly shaking. Someone's tried to keep this buried for over a century. But history belongs to all of us, not the few, not the powerful. There was silence, just the hum of the satellite link, the gentle splash of waves. Carl whispered, We're holding steady, signals strong. Reeve looked past the camera toward the horizon. The rising sun reflected off the waves like burning gold. For the souls who died that night, for the truth, we're not backing down, he said. And then, far off in the distance, they heard it. A low chop. A motor. More than one. Carl stood, adjusting a zoom lens toward the eastern edge of the water. 3 dark shapes, speeding across the surf. Fast boats. They found us, he said grimly. Isa tightened her grip on the uplink's casing. The feed's still up. Let it keep running. Even if they shut us down, Reeve added. It's too late. It's already out there. But as the black boats grew closer, kicking up violent wakes, none of them could deny it. This wasn't over. Not yet. The official narrative of the Titanic, iceberg and all, was about to be challenged in real time. Reeves sat in front of the camera, his voice steady but urgent as he streamed live to the world. "Everything you've been told about the Titanic is a lie," he said, leaning forward, eyes scanning the screen. The live chat was exploding. Hundreds were watching. Some were random passers-by. Others were Titanic obsessives, maritime historians, or conspiracy sleuths. The comments flew by in a blur. "Is this real? Show more proof. What the hell am I watching?" In the middle of it all, Isa's gaze snapped to the horizon. Her expression darkened. "Reeve," she whispered, tension in her voice. "We've got company." A black dot was growing larger in the distance. Another boat, fast, low to the water, dark hull. It was heading straight for them. Reeves barely blinked, adrenaline coursing through him. "Listen to me. We could lose connection any second. Mirror this broadcast. Record it. Download it. Share it everywhere." His voice cracked slightly. The Titanic didn't just hit an iceberg. That was the cover story. It was about eliminating threats to a rising global financial order. And we have the evidence. The approaching vessel cut through, the water like a knife. Now close enough to make out the silhouettes of several men on board. They held something, metallic shapes, rifles, maybe. Carl was hammering away at his keyboard, dropping the live stream's link into every forum and message board he could reach. "The Watchers are here," he muttered. "We're out of time." Reeves kept going, pushing through the fear tightening in his chest. "We've got images, scorch marks that shouldn't exist, internal damage, not external, ship logs that were altered, witness statements buried. It's all." Gunfire cracked the air. The first bullets missed wide, hissing into the sea. Then came the metallic pings, rounds ricocheting off the sea pearls frame. The fishermen who had ferried them out here screamed and ducked. Carl's camera shook violently, but he kept filming. "We have photographic proof," Reeves shouted over the chaos. "Documents, historical records. This is not just theory." A shot hit the laptop. Sparks shot out. The screen stuttered. 70% upload. Isa screamed and flung herself over the device as another shot rang out, shielding it with her body. "Finish it," she cried, voice raw. Then came the final blow, a low whine, rising fast. A rocket. It streaked toward them, trailing smoke. It hit the side of the Sea Pearl with a sound like the earth itself tearing open. The boat rocked violently. A blast of heat and pressure knocked Reeves off his feet. He smashed into the railing. Water rushed in through the torn hull. The upload progress bar on the dying laptop blinked one last time, 90%, before the screen went black. Reeves lay on the deck, ears ringing, lungs burning. He saw Isa flung into the sea, a flash of orange from her life vest. The camera Carl had been using slipped from his hands, spiraling into the water. Carl himself disappeared into a cloud of smoke. Shouts rang out from the black boat. Muzzle flashes danced like fireflies in the dusk. The Sea Pearl listed hard to one side, its death. Rattle echoing across the water. Reeves coughed seawater, trying to stay conscious. Everything spun. He blinked salt from his eyes and saw Isa, barely afloat, clinging to a life vest. "Nolan," she cried, choking on seawater. Then darkness fell over him. Voices buzzed faintly through, the ringing in his ears. "Grab the drives, check for bodies." And then silence. The Sea Pearl slipped beneath the waves, swallowed by the same ocean that had hidden the Titanic's secrets for over a century. Days later, the headlines were brief, buried in the back pages of major outlets. Research vessel lost in tragic accident. Explosion at sea leaves. Multiple missing. Among the presumed dead was Dr. Nolan Reeves, marine biologist and Titanic expedition lead. The coverage was clinical, detached. No mention of sabotage. No hint of violence. Andrew Calder, head of the expedition, gave a polished statement. "We are deeply saddened by the tragic accident. Dr. Reeves was passionate, but we have no reason to suspect anything other than a mechanical failure." Online, the The conspiracy world exploded. Some claimed Reeves had uncovered something buried, literally and politically, about the Titanic's demise, that he'd been silenced. Others dismissed it as nonsense, citing over a century of iceberg evidence. Official statements from the sponsor institute dismissed the scorch marks Reeves had referenced as corroded structural stress. They claimed his final subdive files were lost in a system crash. No one seemed to want to dig deeper, but not everyone forgot. A fragment of Reeves's final broadcast, those desperate final minutes, had survived. The stream had gone live just long enough for a few quick thinkers to rip the video and re-upload it. It spread quietly, bouncing between mirror sites, hidden boards, encrypted forums. In the grainy footage, Reeves's face flickered through static, pointing at photos, referencing cover-ups, naming names. The clip was quickly taken down from major platforms, but it lived on in the darker corners of the web, fueling arguments between armchair historians and full-blown conspiracy theorists. And then there was Isa Grant. She had survived, barely, pulled from the water by a passing fishing trawler. Her hearing was blown, her skin raw from burns, her memory patchy. The trauma clung to her like salt in her hair. But she remembered enough to know they weren't safe, enough to know the watchers weren't done. They were still out there, and now they were hunting survivors. She saw them. Men in black suits walking the coastline with sharp eyes and earpieces, combing every rocky outcrop, scanning the waves, speaking in clipped tones. They were searching for Nolan, for the data, for any trace of what had happened. Out on the Sea Pearl, Isa didn't wait to be found. Heart pounding, she slipped into a public restroom behind a beachside cafe, changed into second-hand clothes from her backpack, and dumped her phone into a trash bin near a busy street. She couldn't risk being tracked. She moved fast, head down, shoulders hunched. Hidden under her coat, strapped tight against her side, was a waterproof pouch containing a single microdrive. Nolan had handed it to her just before the blast. It wasn't everything, but it held enough. Copies of some sabotage photos, fragments of voice logs, a handful of texts between Titanic financiers and shipbuilders, the kind that hinted at something dark buried beneath decades of history. Days later, she reached a small, dusty town hundreds of miles inland. Her safe haven was a dimly lit cottage on the edge of a pine forest, owned by Leo Harmon, a retired investigative journalist and old friend of Carl's. His eyes were tired but sharp, his walls lined with books and yellowed newspaper clippings. When she arrived, Isa barely spoke for hours. Then, one night, over a steaming cup of tea, she let it all spill out. She told him everything. The hidden breach in Titanic's hull that didn't match iceberg damage, the scorch marks, the idea that it was orchestrated. Not a tragedy, but a hit job by early 20th century bankers who saw Titanic as an obstacle. She spoke of the watchers, the black boat, the rocket, the sinking. Leo didn't interrupt. When she finished, he looked at her as if weighing her soul. "I believe you," he finally said. "And I think it's time we make sure the rest of the world hears it too." In the weeks that followed, Isa and Leo built a fragile web of allies, bloggers, whistleblowers, retired academics, a few renegade tech workers. A handful believed enough to help. They called themselves The Circle. They scoured the microdrive's contents, tried to compile a full dossier. It was risky. Nearly every attempt to leak the material online ended the same way. Posts vanished. Journalists retracted stories. Newsroom hard drives were wiped by accident. Even accounts of people they spoke to were scrubbed. Still, fragments of the truth got through. Bits of Reeves's findings began to resurface on obscure conspiracy forums, in late-night AM radio shows, on long Reddit threads buried under skepticism, maritime message boards lit up with debate, users speculating about the steel plating anomalies, asking why some compartments flooded faster than others, digging through archives for discrepancies. The watchers couldn't silence everyone. The Saradi story had grown legs. The idea, planted like a seed by Reeves, was now crawling its way into public consciousness. And what of Nolan Reeves, The official record marked him as dead, drowned in the Atlantic. No body recovered, no funeral, just a paragraph in the Institute's press release, and a vague statement from Andrew Calder, who continued to appear in front of cameras with sorrowful eyes and charitable promises. "We mourn Dr. Reeves," Calder had said, voice smooth as always. He was a passionate voice in maritime research. This was a terrible accident. Then, he refused to answer further questions, but rumours persisted. A dock worker in Nova Scotia claimed he saw a bloodied man board a cargo freighter under a false name. A port guard in Lisbon swore he saw someone who looked like Reeves weeks later, sunburnt, bearded, haunted. Was he hiding? Was he caught? Or was it just wishful thinking? No one knew for sure. But Reeves became a myth, part martyr, part phantom. The man who tried to tell the truth and disappeared. And his story, like the Titanic's wreck, wouldn't stay buried. Meanwhile, young researchers, curious, skeptical, inspired, began quietly re-evaluating the Titanic records. They discovered inconsistencies. A larger breach than an iceberg could cause damage concentrated in areas far from the reported point of impact, crew logs redacted or altered. They found that the steel used in some compartments didn't match the specifications ordered for construction. New expeditions launched under vague titles and small grants. But these ventures often hit strange roadblocks, sudden permit denials, sponsor withdrawals, even surprise lawsuits. Still, the questions wouldn't go away. One foggy morning, in a small seaside town, a retired maritime historian opened his mailbox and found a plain envelope with no return address. Inside was a faded Polaroid photo, grainy but clear enough, to show a warped steel wall with burn patterns. Taped to the back was a slip of paper that read, "They lied. Titanic was murdered. Keep digging." And his breath caught. He looked out toward the sea, heart pounding. Reeves? Issa? Someone else? It didn't matter. The message was clear. The fight wasn't over. He added the photo to a folder he'd kept locked in his study for years, a private archive labelled TS Anomalies. And for the first time, he let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end. It was the start. In a dim, dust-filled basement, beneath a nondescript building in a nameless city, an elderly caretaker ran a cloth across shelves of forgotten boxes. He hummed, softly as he worked. One box, marked in fading ink, caught his eye. Its black leather cover was cracked with age, the label barely legible, "Our Files, Reeve." He opened it. Inside were pages of notes, photographs, microfilm strips, and one battered black notebook. He flipped it open. The first page held a single sentence, written in Reeves's jagged handwriting. "If they erase the truth, we will write it again." The caretaker closed the book and locked it back in its place. Above him, the world kept turning. But below, deep in that archive, the truth waited. Quiet, patient, unburied. Titanic's wrecked hull still held secrets. Inside, tucked between corroded steel and sediment, someone had left behind a bundle. Pieces of Reeves' last transmission, a few grainy photos of an unnatural-looking hull breach, a timeline of economic surges that followed the 1912 disaster, and a single line, scrawled in uneven handwriting on a torn strip of paper. Truth is deeper than you think, and it always surfaces. The caretaker, an old man with tired eyes and oil-streaked hands, stood beside the twisted remains, lips curled in a grim smile. The Watchers, whoever they really were, could bury people. They could erase files, tamper with data, even rewrite history. But truth, like the tides, didn't obey orders. It slipped through cracks, carried on whispers, and sometimes floated to the surface. At the end of the caretaker's notes, written in bold, careful letters, was a single sentence. "Someday, someone will finish what Reeve began. Our story is called False Skies. It's a conspiracy thriller about a government's darkest deception. and the lone whistleblower who dared to drag it into the light. It begins with a chilling premise, that the worst terror attack in modern history wasn't just predicted, it was orchestrated, engineered with precision, not by foreign enemies, but by a coalition of insiders determined to justify endless war and funnel billions into the shadowy heart of the military-industrial complex. 20 years later, a quiet, overlooked former FBI data analyst named Thomas Keane uncovers hidden files that hint at the betrayal. When he leaks them, everything changes. Branded a traitor, hunted, isolated, and determined to share the truth before the machine silences him for good. The story you're about to hear unfolds in 5 parts, each pulling you deeper into the layers of deceit. If your eyes grow heavy along the way, don't worry. The tale is detailed, thick with evidence, speculation, and dread. Maybe you'll drift into uneasy dreams, wondering how fear became the most profitable business on earth. Or maybe, just maybe, you'll stay with it to the end, uncovering one shocking piece after another until you see how power, once tasted, doesn't just hide in the shadows. It clings to them. So take a deep breath. Let it out slowly. Picture the soft flicker of outdated monitors, the dull thud of classified binders dropped onto a metal table, the silence of government halls where decisions echo for decades. This is False Skies. Thomas Keane didn't look like a revolutionary. He looked tired. 39. Hollow-eyed. Hair thinning at the crown. He hadn't slept much in weeks. When he finally pressed send, he didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a man with a weight on his chest, a weight he'd carried in silence for too long. The file was called Black Dust. It didn't sound important. On the surface, it could have been anything, a batch of case notes, an old report, a digital manuscript. But inside, it was a hand grenade. Hundreds of classified FBI memos, shipping records, encrypted messages, internal emails between officials. All of it pointed to a single conclusion. The catastrophe that defined a generation had been built, brick by brick, behind the public's back. It was a Tuesday morning. Overcast sky. Unremarkable. Keane sat alone in a run-down motel room off a forgotten stretch of highway. The wallpaper peeled in the corners. The air reeked of stale coffee, mildew, and burnt hope. His laptop, held together by tape and scratches, whirred with an almost anxious hum. He checked the Wi-Fi. Still up. He tapped in the encryption key. Still secure. Keane's fingers trembled as he clicked the upload icon. He hesitated, closed his eyes. Then he typed a short note in the field marked comments. For the dead who had no idea. For the living who still don't. You deserve the truth. Then he clicked send. Within the hour, the file landed on the servers of Vaultline, a whistleblower site infamous for hosting leaked state secrets. Their editors, seasoned, skeptical, always paranoid, opened the documents with growing unease. Quiet gasps, long silences, muted arguments. By nightfall, the first headline appeared. Online unverified documents suggest high-level knowledge of 20-year-old terror plot. It was buried under disclaimers. Words like alleged, possible forgery, conspiracy theory were used like fire extinguishers. Major networks dismissed it as another AI fake. Some editors called it an editing glitch, citing fabricated timestamps and odd formatting. But not everyone was so sure. The documents were too clean, too consistent, page after page of official memos. Dates, names, interagency briefings, each referencing the same phrase again and again. We need a unifying catalyst. In other words, a trigger. Something so devastating, it would shift the entire national psyche forever. Insurance logs showed high-stakes policy increases weeks before the event, but only on very specific tower floors. Meeting records revealed private wargaming sessions labeled Project Perseus, with budgets that dwarfed anything publicly acknowledged at the time. And then there were the names, real people, still alive, still working in sensitive roles, men and women who had risen, quietly, into advisory positions, or had disappeared entirely. Keane didn't celebrate, didn't smile, didn't even move much once the file went out. He just sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall like it might talk back. Outside, cars hummed by on the distant freeway. A dog barked. Somewhere, someone was laughing through a motel wall thin as paper. But Keane didn't hear any of it. He just thought about what came next, what they would do to him. He had no illusions. The agency would call it a hoax. Then they'd brand him mentally unstable, then dangerous, then something worse. Still, he did it, because the truth had been buried long enough. Days before the leak, Keane had already noticed a pattern that disturbed him deeply. Stand-down orders had been issued for certain military war games, orders that suspiciously mirrored the real timeline of the terror attack. It wasn't just a coincidence. There were too many of them now, too many overlapping data points to ignore. That night, sitting on the edge of a sunken mattress in his motel room, Thomas Keane watched the flickering television screen as a news anchor tried to explain the sudden leak. The anchor looked pale and jittery, reading from the teleprompter as though it might explode at any second. The White House has officially labeled the release as a piece of foreign disinformation. Officials urge the public not to engage with or share the unverified materials currently circulating online. Keane sighed. Here we go. The denial phase had started, swift, sterile, and rehearsed. Next would be the manhunt. He didn't wait to see more. He shut his laptop, slid it into a worn-out satchel, and threw on his jacket. The motel air was thick with the scent of cigarette smoke and mildew, but outside, the night air hit him like a cold slap. He walked quickly to his car and drove into the darkness. Time to disappear. Keane had worked in the FBI's data analytics division for nearly a decade. His job had been boring to most, tracking digital anomalies, flagging oddities in communications, combing through endless files that others dismissed. But around that one historic day, too many strange patterns began to emerge. Patterns no one wanted to look at. Private defense contractors, senior intelligence officials, and financial giants, all of them seemed to benefit massively from the wars that followed. Keane started quietly copying archived files onto encrypted drives, waiting, watching, preparing. Now, the time had come. Elsewhere, in secured facilities and polished conference rooms, the upper echelons of intelligence had begun to panic. His name, Thomas Keane, popped up quickly in an internal risk audit. He was already on their radar from past internal reviews. Within hours, phone calls flew through secure lines. A specialized division, deep black budget, off record, no oversight, initiated containment procedures. At the top of the food chain sat Eldridge Shaw, director of a shadow agency, so secret its acronym wasn't even listed in federal budgets. Shaw personally oversaw the response. He understood what was at stake. If the public believed the leak, if even half of it proved authentic, the entire post-attack world order could collapse. He picked up a secure line and called a trusted contact at one of the largest media conglomerates in the country. Bury the story, he said. Push other headlines. Ignore social media. Delay everything until we clean this up. The compliance was immediate. That night, major news networks gave the leak a passing mention, buried between stories of celebrity divorces and sports scores. But despite the media's silence, the internet roared. The hashtag #BlackDust trended within hours. Digital sleuths and amateur analysts dissected every page of the leak. Coders matched IP addresses from the emails with known government subdomains. Data scientists confirmed document structures and metadata aligned with real internal formats. Some of the memos, previously dismissed as forgeries, were now supported by financial records, insurance adjustments, and public logs. The implication was horrifying. If the documents were genuine, it meant that someone inside the US establishment not only knew about the attacks, but ensured they caused maximum destruction to trigger a war economy. The phrase false skies began to trend, symbolizing how the world the public believed in had been painted like a ceiling, concealing a much darker reality above. Protests began the next morning. Small at first, groups outside federal buildings holding signs that read, "We want truth," or "Black dust is real." But they grew. Quickly, in major cities, thousands began to gather, demanding transparency. The government's official response? More denials. Foreign forgery, malicious actors, digital terrorism. That evening, a rogue hacker group released a chilling message. "We have more. If the mainstream media doesn't cover this, we'll leak the rest." Panic spread. Stocks dipped sharply. Defense contractors linked to the original memos, names like Aegis Tech, Novacore Systems, and Sterling Klein, saw their shares plunge. Boardrooms scrambled to contain the damage. Traders whispered about insider deals going back 20 years. Keane, now in hiding, listened to it all from a remote cabin in the woods, a forgotten property belonging to an old friend. No internet, no TV, just a shortwave radio and the static-laced chaos of the world he'd set ablaze. He felt sick, not with regret but with the weight of it, the noise, the momentum, the knowledge that he had become the center of a narrative he couldn't control. Then came the news he feared. The FBI today named Thomas Keane, a former employee in their data analysis division, as the primary suspect in the unauthorized release of classified information. Officials say he may be connected to foreign groups. He is considered armed and dangerous. They labeled him an extremist, a traitor. The FBI agents he used to have coffee with didn't return calls from journalists. His former supervisor gave a quiet, no comment. But inside those agencies, a growing number of analysts believed the truth was exactly as Keane had framed it, because they knew his work, knew his ability to see patterns others missed. In the storm of controversy, one name resurfaced: Sarah Voss. An investigative journalist once fired from a major network for challenging the official 9/11 narrative, Sarah had spent years compiling scraps of forbidden information. She wasn't surprised by the leak. In fact, many of the phrases and code words in the Black Dust file matched things she'd seen whispered in backroom meetings, leaked in fragments by frightened insiders. She sent a single encrypted message to Vaultline, the site hosting the leak. "I can help verify. Let me speak to the source." Vaultline forwarded her message through their secure relay system. When Keane received her note, flashing in a tiny terminal window connected to a hidden onion network, he hesitated. His fingers hovered above the keys. Then he began to type. "I believe you, and I need your help, but we must move fast." The race had officially begun. Now it wasn't just about truth, it was about survival. If Keane could get Sarah Voss the evidence she needed, and if she could publish it before Homeland Security, Shaw's Black Ops team, or a panicked intelligence machine crushed them, then maybe the world would finally see through the ceiling of false skies. The next move had to be an alliance with Voss. Keane could only hope that her instinct for truth was stronger than her fear of what might happen next. Because if what they were about to expose really did unravel the government's darkest deception, then the people who made billions from war wouldn't think twice about erasing him, or anyone else who tried to shine a light on the lie. 2 days had passed since the leak, and the country was boiling with confusion. Major networks claimed the Black Dust documents were nothing more than a sophisticated hoax. But smaller independent media sites were already publishing comparisons, side-by-side screenshots showing that the formatting matched classified CIA and FBI templates. The metadata held up. Even the timestamps made sense. The public found itself torn in two. On one side was the familiar comfort of the official story. On the other, a growing hunger to question everything. Some people clung to the mainstream narrative, desperate not to believe it had all been a lie. Others, disturbed by the possibility, found their worldview cracking. If these documents were real, than the last 2 decades of war, of body bags, drone strikes, and terror alerts, had been manufactured. Thomas Keane knew he was on every federal watch list by now. Once a mid-level data analyst at the FBI, he'd been known for his precision and thoroughness. But he'd also been the quiet guy who flagged irregular intel reports in the months before 9/11. Nobody took him seriously. Then one day, he resigned. No drama, no goodbyes. What no one knew was that in the months leading up to his departure, he'd been secretly copying old files, documents marked for permanent sealing, anomalies hidden in the noise. Now, the Bureau was feeding the press a different image of him. Mentally unstable, obsessed with conspiracy theories, dangerous. What they didn't mention was that his concerns had once triggered internal rumblings that had almost led to investigations until someone higher up buried them. In a quiet suburban neighborhood outside DC, a black SUV pulled to a stop in front of a modest single-story house. 4 men in unmarked suits stepped out. They didn't knock. They flashed badges from a domestic counterintelligence unit, an unofficial wing of the so-called Black Archive. Rumor had it the group had deep ties to both intelligence and the private sector. Inside, they forced a middle-aged man, a former data engineer who'd worked with Keane years ago to unlock his home computer. They tore through his emails, search history, backup drives. They were looking for anything, mentions of Thomas, black dust, any trace of the files. The same scene played out in multiple homes across the region. Former agents, ex-analysts, even interns who once crossed paths with Keane. None were spared. There were no warrants, no explanations. The Watchers didn't need them. They didn't answer to courts. They answered to Director Eldridge Shaw. Shaw ran a powerful intelligence agency born in the chaotic months after 9/11. From his glass-walled office high above the Capitol, he watched the operation unfold with cold efficiency. He remembered that day vividly. The towers falling, the frantic phone calls, the rush to pass the Patriot Act. He'd risen fast, not by asking questions, but by green-lighting surveillance programs and shaking hands with the right defense contractors. And now all of that, 2 decades of infrastructure built in the shadows, was under threat. Find Reeve, or Keane, whatever he's calling himself, Shaw told his team. We can't let delusions undo 20 years of progress. Meanwhile, Keane stayed on the move. He knew what to look for: license plate scanners on highways, roadside cameras, hidden surveillance drones. He changed cars twice, avoided toll, roads and big cities, stuck to back roads. He traveled light: a few protein bars, bottled water, and prepaid phones bought in different states. At night, he paid for motels in cash, using an old identity that had slipped through system cracks. Every parking lot made him anxious. Every siren in the distance made his heart lurch. Then came a ping on his secure chat app. Voss. We need to meet. I can help verify the files. People trust me, at least in the alt media world. But the clock's ticking. He stared at the message. For a long time, debating. Meeting in person was dangerous. He knew that. But staying in the shadows forever meant the documents could be dismissed as rumors, internet noise, easily ignored by the mainstream. If they didn't act soon, the truth would disappear again. He typed back, "Where?" They settled on a coastal town's public library, just after closing hours. Neutral ground, no cameras inside, no reason for law enforcement to be nearby. The next evening, as Keane approached the lot, he noticed an unmarked silver sedan parked just off to the side. Its engine was off, lights dim. The windows were too tinted to see through. He walked past without slowing, circled the block twice. The car didn't move, probably nothing, but his nerves were taut. His body couldn't tell the difference between real danger and the fear of it anymore. He returned and entered the library through a side door. Inside, Sarah Voss stood between 2 empty bookshelves, the glow from her phone screen lighting her face. She was taller than he expected, in her late 30s, with dark, tired eyes and a worn leather jacket that looked like it had seen too many airports and too little sleep. "You're keen?" she asked, voice low. He nodded, unsure if speaking aloud was safe. She smiled faintly. "Relax. I left my phone in the drop box outside. No one followed me. You?" He hesitated. "Maybe. A sedan outside. Could be nothing." She gestured for him to sit across from her at one of the library's wooden study tables. "Let's be quick. I've read your data dump. If even half of it checks out, this isn't just career-ending, it's seismic." He glanced around, heart still pounding. "You really think people will believe it?" "Some will," she said. "Enough to cause a stir, enough to make Shaw sweat. But we need proof, chain of custody, metadata, a credible voice. To vouch for its origin, that has to be me, or you, or both." Keane looked down at the small encrypted drive he'd brought, fingers trembling slightly as he placed it between them. "This is everything," he said quietly. "They'll come for you next." She picked it up, gave him a long look. "They already are." They sat in a dim corner of the library, surrounded by dust-covered shelves and the faint smell of mildew. The overhead lights buzzed faintly, casting flickering shadows across the worn carpet. Sarah extended her hand. Her voice, steady but urgent. "Thomas, I believe you. The official story always had holes. Let's finalize the proof. Let's blow this wide open." Keane let out a long breath, his chest finally easing as he reached into his coat pocket and slid a small USB drive across the table. "This version's more complete than the leak," he said quietly. "It has the original memos about the stand-down orders, the defense contractor deals, flight path manipulations, and emails, internal ones, referring to the hijackers as assets gone rogue." He paused, voice catching. His eyes shimmered. "They used it, Sarah. Used the tragedy to launch endless wars. I don't even know if they just let it happen, or if they made it happen." Sarah's face stiffened. She opened her laptop, inserted the drive, and began scrolling through the files. Her eyes darted quickly, pausing on encrypted references to foreign bank accounts and a program labeled Operation Silence. "This is huge," she whispered. "But we need more than proof. We need a platform. Something big enough they can't just censor it. If I post it on my blog, it'll get flagged, throttled, or wiped." She leaned forward, her voice low but charged. "We need a journalist, someone inside the system, but not controlled by it, or we go live. Broadcast it ourselves. Somewhere they can't shut us down fast enough. Maybe even both." Before Keane could respond, a sound near the front entrance made them both freeze, a muffled scuffle. Through the glass doors, a figure in dark clothes peered inside. Keane's muscles tensed. Sarah snapped her laptop shut. They moved quickly, ducking, behind one of the tall shelves. Footsteps approached slowly. Keane reached instinctively toward the hidden pocket where he kept a folding blade. Then, a creaky voice called out, "Library's closed, folks. You lost." It was the old caretaker, shuffling in with a ring of keys jingling at his hip, oblivious. Through the glass, the dark figure backed away, then disappeared into the night. Maybe it had been a random passerby, or maybe it was a watcher checking the area. They didn't wait to find out. Minutes later, they slipped out separate exits and vanished into the darkness. Before parting, they agreed to meet again in 48 hours, near a major city. Somewhere, they might infiltrate a local news station that hadn't yet been brought fully under control. It was a desperate gamble. If the Watchers caught even a whisper of what they were planning, they wouldn't hesitate to use force. Lethal force. That night, as Keane checked into yet another rundown motel under yet another borrowed identity, his phone vibrated with a secure message. "One of our guys is dead. Boat accident, they're calling it. It wasn't. They're picking us off." Then nothing. Keane stared at the screen, blood running cold. The man who sent that, Jared, had once helped him decode old FAA logs. A quiet genius, cautious to a fault. Now he was gone. They've started eliminating the secondary sources, Keane whispered to himself. They're trying to make the truth unverifiable. On the streets, protests had begun swelling. Word of the leak had spread, despite the media's attempts to suffocate it. Some marched demanding answers. Others condemned it as a disgrace to the memory of the victims. Social media was ablaze. The country was cracking open. The government's response was swift and sharp. Director Shaw stood behind a polished podium and delivered a chilling statement. We will not allow misinformation to corrode national unity. Those spreading baseless conspiracies will be brought to justice. Meanwhile, Sarah had uncovered a new lead buried in one of the encrypted memos. It was brief, almost accidental. Just a line referencing something called the Saturn Files. Supposedly, it was a hidden ledger, an internal database that tracked financial flows after the attacks, from government budgets to private black accounts, from emergency contracts to campaign donations. If it was real, it would reveal the motive behind it all. They had to find it, and fast. As helicopters circled above highways and random car searches became routine in certain regions, the public started sensing the desperation in the air. The government was scared. It was trying too hard to convince people that nothing was wrong. Keane moved again. New disguise, new state. He changed his gait, dyed his hair, altered his posture. But he knew the net was closing. His luck would run out. Or he'd have to force a final confrontation and hope the storm of public outrage might keep the wolves at bay. He didn't know that Shaw had already greenlit the next phase. A specialized Black Ops team, off the books and without oversight, had been deployed to find him and end the threat. Permanently. If Keane failed to deliver the final piece, the one that made everything undeniable, the truth would die quietly in a sea of discrediting noise. But if he succeeded, the entire post-9/11 architecture of government might collapse under its own lies. The following week was a blur of fear and focus. Keane dodged watchers by day and met Sarah by night in safe houses borrowed from old friends. Each meeting felt heavier, more dangerous. They were close, and they both knew it. Late one night, huddled in the back room of a mechanic's garage in Pennsylvania, Sarah slid a dusty box across the table. Inside, printed memos, old discs, yellowing notes in shorthand code. She tapped a sticky note with trembling fingers. This one mentions the Saturn Files again. And look, dates, transfer amounts, company names. If we can match these to contracts and campaign donations from that time, it's a direct line. Keane's eyes widened. This is the money trail. She nodded. If we can decrypt the full Saturn ledger and trace the funds to who benefited, it's not just speculation anymore, it's conspiracy fact. The final nail, but it meant breaking into a specific data vault. One they now believed was located in a regional intelligence storage facility outside Columbus, the kind of place where digital ghosts went to die. Getting in would be near suicide. Keane looked up from the files, jaw tight. Then we go all the way. Sarah met his gaze, her face pale but resolute. All the way. The clock was ticking. The watchers were closing in. But if they could hold on, just long enough to show the world the ledger, the timeline, the money trail, everything might change. Sarah leaned over the table, her eyes lit by the flickering lamplight. She and Keane sat huddled in the corner of a rundown motel, surrounded by notes, hard drives, and screenshots. Dust danced in the glow of the lamp as they sifted through fragments of encrypted files and images pulled from a compromised server. "Look at this," Sarah whispered, pointing at a set of coordinates buried in the metadata of a corrupted PDF. It leads to a decommissioned NSA facility out in the southwest desert, supposedly defunct, but rumor says they kept cold backups there. Keane rubbed his forehead, anxiety churning in his stomach. "If we can get into that offline archive," she continued, "we can pull the Saturn Files raw. No filters, no metadata, loss. That's our proof. Our smoking gun." He nodded slowly. though the thought of breaking into a federal facility, abandoned or not, tightened his chest. Between the two of them, they had a beat-up Toyota, maybe $3,000 in cash, and some aging laptops. The Watchers, however, had surveillance drones, tactical teams, and unrestricted access to most of the country's camera networks. But maybe that gave them one edge. Maybe the Watchers wouldn't expect a desperate break-in at a place presumed forgotten. Maybe surprise could still mean something. Meanwhile, Director Eldridge Shaw escalated the crackdown. News reports parroted the narrative. Former FBI analyst gone rogue, spreading falsified foreign propaganda to destabilize the nation. Most people swallowed the story. But cracks had started forming. Whispers grew louder. Accidents that didn't make sense. 3 whistleblowers had died in the past week alone, each death ruled coincidental or a robbery gone wrong. One was a well-known data archivist, found shot twice in the chest in his own home. News called it a break-in. But online, people noticed his last posts were all about Saturn-related leaks. The streets stirred. Some city squares erupted with signs. "We deserve the truth," and "Stop killing our whistleblowers." Protesters were met with riot police. Arrests skyrocketed. Keane tried to block out the noise. He knew what was in the Saturn files, or at least what they were rumored to contain. Direct transactions from major defense contractors to high-ranking officials. Money trails linked to legislation that ballooned war budgets after the attack. The attack they now suspected was staged. No wonder they're going to such lengths, Sarah muttered one night as she finished laminating their fake IDs. They took back roads across the country, stopping only long enough to sleep, always paying cash, changing up motels every night. They avoided highways. License plate scanners were everywhere. The Watchers were likely tracking their movements, but they didn't seem to know the precise target yet. Still, every day felt like a roll of the dice. On a desolate stretch of 2-lane road through farmland, a black SUV appeared in the rear view mirror. "That's them," Keane said, voice tight. Sarah's hands gripped the wheel. "Hang on." She veered off the road, tires crunching over dry grass and dirt, barreling through a broken gate into a cornfield. The SUV followed. Muzzle flashes lit up behind them. Shots fired. One struck their rear tire. The car jerked violently, spun, and slammed into a shallow ditch. They bailed out fast, stumbling through rows of tall corn stalks. Keane's heart pounded in his ears. Somewhere behind, doors slammed and boots hit the ground. Flashlights swept through the darkness. They ducked low, barely breathing. Eventually, the Watchers gave up the chase, probably not wanting to draw attention in the open. But the encounter left them shaken, their nerves frayed and raw. "They're scared," Sarah said once they were sure they weren't being followed. "That kind of aggression? It means we're close." Days later, they arrived at the edge of the desert, dust coating their clothes and exhaustion dragging at their limbs. In the fading twilight, they found the fence, rusted, sagging, and overgrown. A section had already been cut open, likely by looters. The place looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Perfect for hiding something no one was ever supposed to find. They slipped through the gap and crouched low as they approached the main building. The structure loomed dark against the sky. Windows were boarded up with rotting plywood. Weeds choked the perimeter. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. Its cry carried on the wind like a warning. Inside, the air was stale and dry. Their footsteps echoed through dust-covered hallways. Paper lay scattered across the floor. Broken chairs. Collapsed cubicles. They swept flashlights side to side as they crept deeper. Down in the basement, they finally found what they were looking for, a sub-level server room. Rows of ancient computer racks lined the walls, blinking faintly with residual power. A soft hum filled the air. "There's still power?" Keane whispered, alarmed. "That's not right." Sarah nodded grimly. "Means someone's still pulling from this place." At the far end of the room stood a heavy steel door with faded letters. Archive 6. Server Vault. It was locked. Sarah pulled out her phone and scanned the barcode etched beside the keypad. from the Saturn documents she'd recovered part of, an old access code. Her phone began generating a bypass. Keen stood watch, gripping a crowbar he'd taken from a supply closet upstairs. His palms were slick with sweat. Every nerve in his body screamed that they were being watched. In the silence, he whispered, "Let's make this count." The screen blinked, green. A soft click echoed from the steel door marked Archive 6. Keen and Sarah exchanged a glance. The bypass had worked. They pushed the heavy door open. Inside, the air was cool, dry, preserved by an aging but still functional climate system. Metal shelves stretched across the vault, lined with reels, tapes, and drives coated in dust but still, humming faintly. A low, continuous whir underscored the eerie stillness. Sarah ran a hand across the spines of labelled drives. Operation Cast Peak. Post-K War Roster. Then she stopped. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Here. Saturn. A cluster of dented, black servers sat in the far corner, tagged simply Saturn FSV. They quickly hooked one terminal to Sarah's laptop. Keen wiped sweat from his brow as Sarah powered the system on. The screen blinked alive, casting a faint glow across the vault. Lines of text scrolled up. Root command authorized Saturn access levels 1, 2, 3. Enter password. Sarah's fingers hovered over the keys. She entered terms scraped from leaked documents, code words, names, dates. The first 2 attempts failed. On the third, beep access granted a new screen loaded, packed with directories. Sarah's eyes widened as file names flooded the screen. Each folder carried labels more damning than the last. Funding authorizations, building demolitions, insider trade logs. Hijacker assets, Keen, scrolled through one set of logs. These trades, they happened days before the attack, he muttered. They knew. Another file detailed massive bank transfers, direct payments from weapons manufacturers to private accounts held by political figures. This is... Sarah stared at the screen, stunned. They orchestrated the whole thing to stir up fear, push through war budgets, and funnel billions into the defense economy. Keen's voice was tight, and they used the national security apparatus to keep it buried. Another document referenced the hijackers, listed not as threats, but controlled ignition assets. Their profiles were marked with tags like asset drift and predictive value. High footsteps. Both froze. From upstairs, heavy boots thudded against old concrete. Flashlights swept the walls above. A faint buzz. Radios. They'd been detected. They tracked the power usage, Keen said, panic creeping into his voice. We need to copy this now, Sarah said, yanking 2 external drives from her bag. Keen started the transfer while she shut off the main lights and ducked behind a row of servers. The terminal glowed with the progress bar. Transfer, 2%, 4%, 7%. Then chaos. Flashlights burst into the vault. Move! A voice barked. Gunfire erupted. Sparks flew as bullets tore through the metal casing. Sarah ducked, returned fire with a compact pistol. Keen crouched low, staying focused on the screen. 10%, 17%. He connected the system to a satellite uplink, an encrypted channel routed to a safe mirror node on the open web. A portable router blinked green, then a booming voice shook the air. Stop! Director Eldridge Shaw stepped into the corridor, flanked by black-clad agents. Keen, you have no idea what you're about to unleash. You'll burn every alliance we've built. That day, those complexities had to be buried. The server room lit up with more gunfire. Sarah cried out, grazed along her shoulder, but stayed down, keeping the shooters pinned. Keen's fingers flew across the keys. Upload, 30%, 42%, 50%. Shaw's voice cut through the fray again. Toss it! One agent hurled a flashbang. Boom! A deafening blast shook the vault. Light burned through Keen's vision. His ears rang. Before he could react, agents swarmed. One tackled Sarah, Another drove Keane to the floor, a boot slammed. Onto the laptop, cracking the screen. Upload 80%, frozen. But Keane fought back, desperation flooding him. He swung the shattered laptop into an agent's face, knocking the man out cold. The impact jogged the computer. The display flickered, then continued. 2%. 85%. Shaw barked more orders. One agent yanked at the cables. Another fired at the server rack. A stray round struck a coolant line. Steam exploded from the pipe, hissing through the room like a banshee's wail. "They're going to blow the place," Sarah shouted. Shaw advanced on Keane, pistol raised. "You can die here with your delusions, or you disappear. But this doesn't leave this room." Keane's hand trembled as he reached for the final key. Then, the coolant system failed catastrophically. A roar vibrated through the metal walls. Flames burst from a junction box in the corner. Panic swept the agents. "Fire! Back out!" Shaw hesitated, then turned. Sarah crawled free from her captor's grasp. Blood smeared her sleeve, and smoke choked the air around her. Keane, face burned, arms shaking, looked back at the screen. Upload. 98%. 99%! "Come on!" he roared, slamming a fist down. "Transfer complete." A long tone beeped. "Success." The agents saw it too. One of them raised a rifle, aimed at Keane's chest. A single shot cracked. Darkness swept over him. They pulled the cable, but it was too late. The Saturn files had gone out, mirrored to nodes beyond their reach. Alarms screamed. Flames devoured the vault. One final explosion, massive, ripped through the sub-level. Shaw was dragged out by his men as the vault collapsed inward, smoke and dust spewing from the vents like a dying breath. No body was found, no confirmation of Keane's fate, but the war was lost for the Watchers. Within hours, the Saturn files were everywhere. An anonymous torrent of revelations, insider emails, audio briefings, forged timelines, black budgets, a digital tsunami that crashed through the barriers of censorship. Social media exploded. Journalists, coders, rogue archivists all mirrored the data. Government agencies scrambled, issuing frantic denials. But it was too late. The truth had gone. Viral.files, codenamed Operation White Doors and Project Switchboard, confirmed what conspiracy theorists had only whispered for years. Backroom deals with extremist factions, media coordination, staged escalation, all engineered to justify endless war, and at the center of it all, a name resurfaced. Thomas Keane. Dead, maybe, but he had lit the match. The attacks triggered chaos. Panic surged through the public, and the nation plunged into indefinite war mobilization. Across the globe, world leaders scrambled for answers. US allies demanded urgent explanations from Washington, while rival nations called for an emergency session at the United Nations. Back home, it wasn't just the classified documents themselves that caused outrage. It was what they revealed. Memos circulated online, showing top American officials debating how many civilian deaths were acceptable for strategic advantage. The public was horrified. Disbelief turned into fury. Massive protests erupted in capital cities across the world. Crowds demanded resignations. People waved signs with slogans like, "We were lied to," and "Justice for the victims." In Washington, the intelligence community, an institution long seen as untouchable, was facing the worst credibility crisis in its history. The White House responded with denial. Officials claimed the leaked documents were doctored forgeries, but their words fell flat. A growing team of anonymous data scientists came forward, validating the digital signatures, file timestamps, and access logs. Everything matched records that were over 2 decades old. Even some current and former mid-level intelligence workers, disturbed by what they read, publicly confirmed the authenticity of the leaks. In the US, the fallout was swift. Crowds swarmed government buildings in DC, New York, and Chicago, chanting for the arrest of officials named in the files. Defense contractors saw their stock prices collapse. CEOs and board members faced mounting lawsuits. Many resigned. A few even fled the country. Retired generals began making public statements, some outright denying involvement, others offering half confessions, saying they were pressured or kept in the dark. Their interviews dominated news cycles. The nation watched in stunned silence, cycling between rage, heartbreak, and a deep sense of betrayal. Major news outlets, at first hesitant to touch the story, began shifting tone. After initial attempts to dismiss the documents, high-profile anchors appeared on air, voice shaking, apologizing for having once parroted the government's version of events. But not all followed suit. A handful of networks doubled down on patriotic rhetoric, blaming foreign actors and deep fakes, claiming the scandal was meant to destroy national unity. Ironically, their resistance only deepened public distrust. A flood of both disinformation and verified evidence filled the internet, but the truth could no longer be hidden. "You can't close the barn door after the horses flee," one commentator said grimly on a live stream. In a desperate attempt to regain control, director Eldridge Shaw stood before the press, trying to deliver a calming statement. He didn't get far. Reporters shouted over him. Protesters gathered outside the building screamed for his resignation. The press conference dissolved into chaos. As pressure mounted, Shaw's office declared a national security emergency. They urged the declaration of martial law to preserve order, but instead of compliance, it ignited more rebellion. Several state governors flat out refused to cooperate, calling the move unconstitutional. The old power structures began to crack. Multiple investigations launched from different corners of the government. Newly empowered lawmakers vowed to prosecute those who had used the post-attack panic to enrich themselves. Amid the chaos, Sarah Voss stepped back into public view. She was scarred, exhausted, but alive. In a televised interview, she described how the Watchers had overrun the abandoned NSA facility where she and Thomas Keane had tried to upload the Saturn files. Keane, she said, had died buying her enough time to finish the transmission. Later that night, Sarah published a piece titled "One Man's Last Key Press." In it, she described the final moments inside the bunker. Bullets ripping through metal walls, servers sparking, alarms blaring, and how Keane, despite being mortally wounded, stayed at the terminal. With trembling fingers, he hit enter one last time. The piece went viral. Across the country, people began to see Keane not just as a whistleblower, but as a fallen hero, someone who'd risked everything to make the truth known. In towns and cities, the families of 9/11 victims began demanding new trials. They wanted the original commissions thrown out. The entire foundation of the official story was now suspect. For years, contradictory evidence had been sealed away. Now, even some of the investigators who once supported the narrative admitted they'd been misled, or worse, threatened into silence. It was as if the nation was grieving all over again. But this time, the grief was tangled with guilt. People asked themselves, how did we let this happen? How did fear become so profitable? Abroad, the ripple effects were just as severe. Some of America's closest allies withdrew their forces from conflict zones, citing lost trust. Others launched their own parliamentary inquiries, worried they had been manipulated into complicity. The post-9/11 world order, built on fear, surveillance, and endless war, was crumbling. In the void, uncertainty loomed. Some hoped the chaos would lead to a more peaceful global approach. Others feared it would only empower new extremist movements. There were whispers of factions taking advantage, of cells regrouping in unstable regions, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. In the middle of it all, a strange rumor began to circulate. Thomas Keane, some said, was still alive. There were alleged sightings in a dusty border town, on a fishing boat in the South Pacific, even in a mountain village in Northern Europe, but none were verified. Official sources declared him presumed dead. Still, the stories persisted. A man with scars on his hands, limping slightly, always moving, always looking over his shoulder. And somewhere, buried beneath the debris of secrecy and betrayal, the truth kept pulsing. If Thomas Keane had survived, he likely chose to vanish into anonymity. He had done what he set out to do. There was no glory to chase, only peace to seek, far from the noise and fury he'd unleashed. 6 months later, the US Senate convened the largest public hearing in decades. The chamber was packed, cameras rolled non-stop, and millions watched from home. A parade of powerful figures filed in, former generals, ex-CEOs, high-ranking officials from 20 years ago. Subpoenas had dragged them back into the light. The atmosphere was electric, tense. Some of the accused leaned heavily on national security to deflect questions. Others pled the fifth, eyes glassy, jaws clenched. A few broke, admitting to partial involvement, blaming systemic pressure, deflecting with vague justifications. The nation watched, breath held, as long-buried truths surfaced. Indictments followed. Some went to trial. A handful were convicted, but many walked free. The machinery of power had been too deeply rigged, too sprawling to dismantle in one sweep. Still, the symbolic weight was undeniable. The public had learned to never again swallow the official story without question. Meanwhile, Sarah Voss had transformed. No longer hunted, she launched her own independent media network, False Skies. It broadcast daily updates, deep dives into leaked records, first-hand accounts from insiders, scientists, veterans, former agents, even grieving families, stepped forward with testimonies and documents. People who had once been blacklisted or silenced now found a platform. Sarah became a leading voice in the call for government transparency, her face familiar on street murals and in viral videos. She didn't play pundit. She told the truth, raw and unscripted. And people listened. A year after the Saturn Files leak, a new memorial was erected near Ground Zero. Unlike the towering steel and stone of past monuments, this one was quiet, haunting. A lone bronze figure sat at a desk, finger poised above a keyboard. The inscription beneath read, "They took truth from us in the shadows. He brought it back in the light." Visitors came daily. Some wept, others stood silent, heads bowed. Flowers appeared at the statue's feet. A few tucked folded notes beneath the base, words of thanks, grief, or the aching need for closure. For many, the statue didn't just honor a man. It honored an idea that no lie, no matter how powerful, can live forever. Epilogue. In a quiet, coastal town, nameless, grey-skied, always smelling faintly of brine, a fisherman leaned against the dock at dawn. He sipped bitter coffee from a metal cup when a stranger passed by. The man looked older than his years, hair bleached by salt and sun, eyes tired in a way that went deeper than sleep. The fisherman stared, heart stuttering. You look like that guy," he said, pointing to the wrinkled photo he'd clipped from a newspaper and pinned in the wheelhouse years ago. "The one who..." The man just smiled faintly. "I used to work for the government," he said, voice low and distant. But not anymore. They spoke for only a few minutes. The stranger talked of illusions, the heavy price of revealing them, and how once something is seen, truly seen, it can never be unseen. Then he walked toward the rising sun, vanishing into the orange mist. He left behind nothing but a flash drive, tucked into a coiled rope by the pier. The fisherman never opened it, said he didn't dare, but he kept it locked in his drawer just in case. If it was Thomas Keane, he'd chosen solitude. No press, no podiums, just distance, letting the world grapple with what he'd exposed. Public trust in the old institutions never fully recovered. Some remained furious, angry that justice was incomplete. Others held on to a fragile hope that a new, more transparent system might slowly grow from the rubble. Online forums buzzed with theories about watchers still operating in the shadows, about possible future false flags, about splinter groups and retaliation plans. But for now, the greatest deception of the modern age had been pulled into the light. The codename Black dust had become legend, a symbol of truth's defiant rise against a wall of lies. And when the noise faded, in the silence that followed, they used fear to shape the world. But one day, fear lost. Truth, unpolished, dangerous and unstoppable, broke free. And with a single keystroke, the illusions that once cloaked the skies were torn apart. Welcome, weary travelers of the night. Before we continue our journey through forgotten memories and sins long buried, tell me, how was your day? What time? Is it where you are, whether you're listening from a quiet street in suburban Ohio, the sleepless neon corridors of Tokyo, or somewhere in between? You've found your way to Sleep Theories. If these whispered stories guide you into sleep or deeper places, please consider subscribing. We have many more secrets to uncover together. Now, settle in, close your eyes. Let me tell you about a man named Caleb Monroe and the terrible truth he discovered about himself in the dying light of the 20th century. The first time I blacked out, I was standing in the produce aisle of a Harris Teeter, blood on my collar. I'd been reaching for apples, red ones, gala, I think. Then everything tilted, like the world had suddenly unplugged. One moment I was comparing fruit. The next, I was staring at myself in the polished glass of the refrigerated case. My reflection looked wrong, not just tired, off. And then I noticed the crimson droplets falling from the collar of my white polo shirt, dotting the linoleum floor. I checked my hands, my arms. Nothing. No cuts. I even ran my tongue across my lips, expecting to taste copper. But there was nothing. Just blood. 3 fresh drops, and I had no idea where they came from. A kid from the store, maybe 19, acne-scarred, eyes full of concern, stepped forward. "Sir, are you okay?" I nodded, dazed, mumbled something about a nosebleed. I left without buying anything. The automatic doors whispered shut behind me as I stepped into the parking lot. The sky was overcast, damp. I stood there, trying to piece together the last 15 minutes of my life. But there was nothing. Just blankness. That was October 15th, 1998. Thursday. I remember it was Thursday because I'd taken the afternoon off from my job at the insurance company, just running errands before Sarah got home. Typical, suburban, forgettable stuff. Groceries, dry cleaning, oil change, the kind of day that disappears in memory because nothing unusual ever happens. But then it did. The second time it happened, I was standing in the kitchen making coffee. It was early. Sarah had already left for her teaching job. The house was still, filled with that soft, creaky silence that only empty homes seem to have. Wood settling, faint clicks in the walls. The coffee maker hissed and gurgled as steam drifted up from the carafe. Then I heard it, a voice. Not from the radio, not from outside. Closer, much closer. "The moon is full in Shanghai." 5 words, quiet, crisp, spoken directly into my ear. Spun around, heart thudding, but no one was there. The voice wasn't familiar, but something about it felt known. A woman's voice. Soft. Measured. Just the faintest touch of an accent I couldn't place. And then, paralysis. My whole body stiffened like I'd been hit with a taser. My fingers went numb. The coffee mug slipped from my hand and shattered against the floor. And then, nothing. Just black. I came to in the driver's seat of my car, parked outside a Denny's in Richmond, Virginia. My hands were locked around the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were bone white. The dashboard. Clock read 11:47 p.m. I'd lost 16 hours. No idea how I got there. No memory of the drive. No memory of anything after the voice. The ride home took 2 hours. I don't remember most of it. I felt like I was floating, like I was watching myself from just above the windshield. The next morning, I called in sick, told Sarah I had food poisoning. She believed me, probably because I looked like hell, pale, shaking, deep shadows under my eyes like I hadn't slept in days, and honestly, maybe I hadn't. That's when I started the journal. Not the usual kind of journal. No feelings, no daily reflections. This was colder, clinical, desperate. I wrote down every memory gap, every strange sensation, every moment when time felt wrong or my vision started to blur at the edges. October 21st, lost 3 hours. Found myself in basement. Dirt under fingernails. Can't remember going downstairs. October 29th, heard voice again. Something about sparrows flying backward. Woke up with torn knuckles, grass stains on jeans. November 3rd, Sarah said I was talking, in my sleep, repeating numbers. Thought it was my social security number, but it was wrong. The journal became the only thing anchoring me to reality. My one defense against the creeping feeling that I was losing my mind. Sarah thought it was stress. Told me to talk to Dr. Morrison, our family physician. Said maybe I needed anti-anxiety meds, but I knew it wasn't stress. This was something else. The breakthrough came in mid-November, about 3 weeks after I woke up outside that Denny's. I was cleaning out the medicine cabinet, throwing out expired cold meds and half-used toothpaste tubes when I found it. A prescription bottle, hydroxyzine, 25 milligram tablets. My name was on the label. The date was from 6 months ago, but I had no memory of seeing this bottle before. The prescribing doctor was someone named Dr. Elena Vasquez, Riverside Medical Center, but I'd never been to Riverside. I called them, thinking maybe I just forgot. But they had no record of me ever being a patient, no record of a Dr. Vasquez either. According to them, no doctor by that name had ever worked there. The prescription number didn't exist in their system, but the pills were real. The bottle was real. And when I looked at those small, round white tablets, something in the back of my brain began to itch, like a memory trying to claw its way out of the dark. I started going to the Richmond Public Library, mostly during lunch breaks, sometimes after work. Always to the same room, the microfilm archive. The place smelled like mildew, dust, and old secrets. That dry, paper and decay scent of forgotten knowledge. I didn't know what I was looking for, exactly. Just something, anything. Medical journals, military records, congressional transcripts from the 70s. My eyes burned from hours of scrolling through film reels on the clunky old viewer. The librarian, Mrs. Chen, never asked questions. She just helped me load the reels. Though I caught her glancing at me sometimes, like she wanted to ask what I was doing, but didn't dare. I must have looked half mad. Hunched over the machine, eyes wide, fingers trembling as I scanned document after document. None of it should have connected to me. An insurance adjuster from Chesterfield with a nice house and a quiet life. But deep down, I knew it did. I could feel it. And then, one Tuesday night in early December, I found something I was deep into, reviewing declassified CIA documents from the 1970s, files released under the Freedom of Information Act. Most of it was a mess of redactions, thick black bars crossing out names, operations, entire paragraphs. Still, patterns began to emerge. Project Coulter, artichoke, bluebird, words that meant nothing to the average person. But to me, they were starting to feel familiar, too familiar. The deeper I went, the colder I felt. The documents spoke of mind, control experiments, psychological conditioning, LSD administered without consent, electroshock therapy not for healing, but for breaking people, dismantling their minds and rebuilding them into something else. I kept turning reels in the microfilm viewer, the screen glowing dimly in the quiet library room. Then, I found it. A single line buried in a budget report from 1976, almost fully blacked out, but still partially visible. Project Hermes, subject acquisition and conditioning. $2.3 million allocated for continuation of pediatric protocols. Hermes. As soon as I read that word, something snapped. My vision narrowed to a pinpoint. The room around me, the microfilm viewer, the shelves, the faint ticking of the clock, all of it fell away, and I was somewhere else. A white room, no windows. The sharp, chemical smell of antiseptic. A woman's voice, calm and deliberate, saying a name that wasn't mine, not Caleb. A number. I blinked hard. The room came rushing back. Mrs. Chen, the librarian, was standing beside me, a hand on my shoulder, worry all over her face. "You okay, honey?" You went white as a sheet. I managed a nod, mouth dry. "Yeah, just dizzy. I'm fine." I scribbled the document reference number down and left the library as fast as I could. That night, sleep wouldn't come. Every time I shut my eyes, I was back in that white room. I could feel the cold of metal touching my temples. Hear voices discussing me like I wasn't a person, like I was a specimen, a test subject. The next morning, I called in sick again. Didn't even bother with an excuse this time. I packed a bag, got in the car, and drove straight to the National Archives in College Park, Maryland. If Project Hermes was real, if it was connected to me, I needed to find out how deep it went. The archives were a maze of hallways, forms, and security checks. I filled out paperwork, stood in lines, spoke with clerks who barely looked up from their desks. Most of them gave me the same look, skeptical, slightly annoyed. I could tell they thought I was just another conspiracy nut. But I work in insurance. If there's one thing I've mastered, it's patience. It took 3 full days to gain access to the right collections, another 2 to find what I was looking for. The Hermes file was thin, maybe 50 pages in total, but even redacted, the contents made my hands tremble as I turned the pages. Subject acquisition protocols, age range 6 to 12 years, optimal trauma-based conditioning, memory suppression techniques, long-term activation procedures. Then, photographs. 23 black and white photos, children in hospital beds, electrodes on their scalps, IVs in their arms. Most of the faces were blurred out, redacted, but one wasn't. A boy, maybe 8 years old, dark hair, sharp eyes. He lay still in a hospital bed, staring directly into the camera, with an expression too heavy for a child, something in his gaze. It was weary, guarded. I stared at that photo for a long time. It was me. Me at 8 years old. The photo's file number was printed along the bottom. M17410. Status: dormant. The memories didn't come all at once. They arrived in fragments, sudden, violent flashes, like lightning strikes in the dark. Driving home one night, I was stopped at a red light when the smell of antiseptic hit me. Out of nowhere, my heart started racing. I looked around, but there was nothing. Just the traffic, light blinking overhead. But I could hear it, that low electric hum, that whine of machinery. Other times it would happen while watching TV. Just the static of changing channels would send me spiraling into flashes of white coats, murmuring voices, the sharp clink of metal tools. The clearest memory came on a Saturday morning. I was shaving. I leaned in close to the mirror, running, the razor along my jaw. And suddenly, I saw myself. Not just a glance, not just my reflection. I really looked, and I realized something was wrong. Those weren't my eyes staring back. They were his, the boy in the photo, 30 years older, but unchanged. Same emptiness, same frozen stare. The razor dropped from my hand and clattered into the sink. I gripped the sides of the counter to steady myself, but it was no use. I was gone. Back in the white room. The lights were too bright, the walls too smooth. I could feel the cool vinyl of the bed beneath me. The woman was there again, the one with the red lipstick. She always smelled like lilacs and alcohol swabs. She sat beside me in a chair, holding a clipboard in one hand. Her eyes were kind, her touch gentle, but her voice held something else. Control. "Tell me about the sparrow, Caleb," she said. And I knew the answer, not from memory but from training, from pain, from soft approval, from cold experiments and long nights in that sterile room. I looked at her, my young voice echoing in that ghost of a room. The sparrow flies backward. When it started to rain, she smiled faintly and jotted something down on her clipboard. Good boy. Her voice was soft, soothing. And what happens, she asked, when the sparrow flies backward? I blinked. My mouth moved before I even thought. I listened for instructions. That's right. And do you remember listening for instructions? I nodded slowly. No, Mom. Perfect. The memory dissolved like smoke, but others rushed in behind it. A fast-moving kaleidoscope, sterile white rooms, humming machines, tubes and electrodes, the quiet hiss of oxygen, soft-spoken voices that always asked gently, but led me toward horror. One memory stood out. A rabbit sat in a cage, white fur, pink eyes, twitching nose. It tracked me as I moved closer. The woman with the clipboard stood behind me, resting a hand lightly on my shoulder. The rabbit is sick, Caleb. It's suffering. Can you help it stop suffering? I knew what she meant. Of course I did. They'd trained me to know. My small hands trembled. I reached into the cage. I didn't want to, but something deeper inside me moved like it was on rails. I can't watch, I whispered. Close your eyes then, she said gently, but don't let go. That's where the memory ended. But the truth lingered. My adult fingers could still feel it. The soft give of tiny bones, the sickening click. Later, there were other tests, not animals. A man was brought into the white room, tied to a chair, duct tape stretched across his mouth. He looked maybe 30. Brown hair, soft, unremarkable face, like a guy who fixed air conditioners or worked a quiet desk job. He looked terrified. He's a bad man, Caleb, the woman said beside me. He hurt children like you. Don't you want him to stop? I was 12, old enough to understand the words, too young for understanding not to drown me. There were tools on the table, cold metal, surgical precision. I had been trained on them too. I don't want to, I said. My voice cracked. My heart pounded like a drum. The woman didn't raise her voice, didn't sound angry. When it rains, she said, the sparrow flies backward. My whole body locked up. Thought dissolved. Everything inside me went quiet. When I came back to myself, the man was gone. My hands were scrubbed clean. There was no blood. Nothing left but the hollow silence of forgetting. She handed me a sandwich a little while later, asked if I was hungry. I remember the gratitude I felt. Pure, uncomplicated, like a dog being praised. I stood in my bathroom for 20 minutes after that memory returned, just gripping the sink, breathing through my nose, trying not to puke. The man in the mirror looked the same, 43 years old, grey creeping into my hair, tired lines around my eyes. But now I could see underneath the surface, a weapon, a tool, something built to kill and forget. I found Lena on a support forum for military veterans, even though neither of us had fought in any war listed in the history books. Her post was buried deep in a thread about repressed memories and black ops. Most of the replies were what you'd expect. Talk of chemtrails, satellites beaming thoughts, aliens hiding in Congress. Noise. But Lena's message was different. Clinical. Specific. Grounded. Looking for others who were part of Project Hermes. 1970s, 1980s. I have documentation, episodes of missing time, physical evidence, need to compare notes. I stared at that post for 3 days before I messaged her. What do you even say to someone who might be the only person on the planet who understands what you've lived through? I think I was part of it too. Can we talk? She replied within an hour. Burke Lake Park, Virginia, Wednesday, 2 p.m. I'll be feeding ducks near the boat launch. Come alone. Burke Lake was about 40 minutes from my place. Quiet, family-friendly. Joggers, kids on scooters, retired couples with thermoses of coffee. It struck me as an odd spot for a secret meeting, but maybe that was the brilliance of it. No one would look twice at two middle-aged people feeding ducks. I recognized her right away, even though we'd never met. She looked younger than me, maybe late 30s. Short grey hair, compact build, the way she stood, calculated, cautious, told me she was ready to run at a moment's notice. She was scattering breadcrumbs across the water when I approached. A cluster of mallards waddled close. "Caleb?" she asked. I nodded. "Lena?" She studied my face for a long time. Not the way strangers look at each other. No, she was searching for something. A marker, a flaw, a code. Eventually, she nodded, once, like checking a box in her mind. "Let me see your hands." I hesitated. "What?" "Your hands. Palms up." I didn't ask again. I held them out. She stepped closer and ran a finger along the inside of my left palm. Her eyes softened just a little. "You have the scar." "Same place as mine," she murmured. She held up her left hand and showed me. There it was, a faint white scar, barely, an inch long, running along the edge of her palm. I stared at it. Somehow, just seeing it made me feel mine more vividly, like it had come alive. That thin line I'd always told myself was from some forgotten childhood injury, a fall, a broken plate, something mundane. I always explained it away, I said, rubbing the scar as it pulsed faintly under my skin. "It's a tracking chip," Lena said flatly. "Passive RFID, most likely. Small enough to implant without our knowledge. They could monitor us without any active signal." We started walking along the path circling the lake. It was cool and quiet. Ducks trailing ripples across the water, joggers passing us with polite nods. The normalcy made her story feel even more unreal. Like me, she'd started having episodes in her 40s. "Lost time," she said. "Strange dreams. Violent urges I couldn't explain. I'd come to and find bruises on my arms, dirt under my nails. One time I woke up in my driveway, barefoot and shaking. No memory of leaving the house." I nodded slowly. "Same. Difference is, I got lucky. I found a therapist, Dr. Martinez. He specializes in trauma recovery and doesn't jump straight to the 'you're delusional' conclusion. He helped me understand what was happening." "What was happening?" I asked, even though part of me already knew. "The programming doesn't go away," she said. "It's designed to stay dormant until it's triggered." I felt cold despite the sweater I was wearing. "We were sleeper agents, Caleb," she continued. "Built-in assets for someone." "The CIA?" She shook her head. "That's what I thought at first. But the deeper I've dug, the less that makes sense. Hermes. I think it was something else. Not official. Maybe a private program. Or rogue operators inside the agencies. People with their own goals." We found an empty bench overlooking the lake and sat down. A child squealed with laughter behind us. Someone tossed a frisbee. A couple took selfies nearby. All of it felt grotesquely out of sync with what we were discussing. "Can I show you something?" Lena asked quietly. She pulled up the sleeve of her sweater and extended her arm. There, burned into the skin of her left forearm in neat block letters, was a code. 4X91I stared. "What the hell?" "I found it 3 months ago," she said. "Stepped into the shower one morning and there it was. No pain, no memory of how it got there. Like someone branded me in my sleep." The sight of it sent a ripple through my thoughts. That familiar itch behind the eyes. The buzzing, metallic unease I felt whenever I heard a trigger phrase or saw an old test diagram. "Have you tried finding others?" I asked. She nodded. 12 so far, all with similar stories, all with the scar. Some have the brand, not all. We think the codes might indicate functions. I swallowed hard. Functions? Lena's face went still. We weren't all trained for the same thing, Caleb. Some of us were programmed for reconnaissance, others for infiltration. Some, her voice faltered. for termination. I saw it then. The man in the chair, the fear in his eyes, the tools on the tray beside me. "How do we know if we've been activated?" I asked, my voice dry. "That's the problem," she said. "We don't. The programming is made to erase itself. One moment you're reading a book or making breakfast, then something, a phrase, an image, a sound, triggers it, and you change. When it's over, you come back with no memory, no clue what you've done." She reached into her bag and pulled out a thick manila folder. "I've been documenting everything. Newspaper clippings, police reports, obituaries, all tied to regions where one of us has had an episode." I opened the folder and my stomach clenched. A businessman in Atlanta, dead in his hotel room. Official cause, heart attack. But he had no cardiac history and was only 45. A journalist from Chicago, killed in a single-car crash on a clear day. She'd been investigating military defense contractors. A federal judge hung himself in his home. His friends said he was in good spirits days before. No history of depression. "We think these might be activations," Lena said, her voice low. "Some of us being triggered to eliminate threats, people who know too much, or who are getting too close." I closed the folder and looked away, bile rising in my throat. "How do we stop it?" I asked. "I don't know if we can," she admitted. "But I think something bigger is coming. The episodes are becoming more frequent. More people are waking up with missing time." She pulled out one last document. It was a printout from a news website, dated just 3 days earlier. Defense contractor. Executive found dead in home. Marcus Webb, 58, senior vice president of Titan Defense Solutions, was found deceased in his Petoac home Tuesday evening. Authorities are treating the death as suspicious. Webb had recently been scheduled to testify before a congressional committee investigating military contracts. He was looking into black budget programs from the Cold War, Lena said, including Hermes. I stared at the page, heart pounding. Someone was cleaning house, and we were still in it. He'd been trying to identify survivors, gathering evidence, preparing to testify. I stared at the article, rereading the final lines over and over until the words blurred. A terrible suspicion crawled up my spine and settled deep in my chest. "When did he die?" I asked. Lena flipped through the article. Again. "Tuesday night, around 11 p.m, according to the coroner." Tuesday night. The night I woke up in the kitchen at 3 a.m, sitting on the floor, back against the fridge. My hands were muddy, my shirt stained with blood. I'd told Sarah it must have been a nosebleed. She believed me. Hell, I almost believed it myself. But now... "Lena," I said quietly, carefully, "do you know what Marcus Webb looked like?" She nodded, pulled up the article again, and turned her phone to show me. A man in his mid-50s, greying at the temples, thin wire-rimmed, glasses, gentle eyes. There was something warm in his expression, something kind. But when I looked at that face, my stomach tightened. I'd seen him before. In a dream, I thought. Or maybe not a dream at all. The call came at 2:17 a.m. on a Friday in January. I hadn't been sleeping well for weeks. Night after night, I lay beside Sarah in the dark, listening to her steady breathing, trying to convince myself that Webb's death was coincidence, that the blood on my shirt had been from a harmless nosebleed, that the blackouts, the gaps in memory, were just stress. But even as I clung to those explanations, something in me already knew better. The phone rang. Once. Twice. I answered it with a trembling hand. "Hello?" Silence. Then a soft click. The line went dead. I lowered the receiver, heart still hammering. But just as I started to set it back down, I heard it. Not from the phone. From behind me. From within me. A voice, clear and close, whispering directly into my ear. "The moon is full in Shanghai. My body locked up, every muscle seized. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. Then, numbness, cold, sweeping, absolute, spread through my limbs. And just before the blackout came, I heard it, the sound of my own heartbeat, loud and slow and thundering like war drums. I was walking, underground, a parking, garage, concrete walls, dim, yellowish lights overhead flickering like tired eyes. My shoes echoed across the floor as I moved toward a dark sedan parked near the elevators. The keys were already in my hand. I didn't remember picking them up, but I knew, without doubt, exactly what I was supposed to do. I got into the car, started the engine. The route came to me effortlessly. 40 minutes through quiet suburban streets, no GPS, no map. Every turn burned into my muscles, like I'd done it 100 times. The house was 2 stories, beige siding, blue shutters, perfectly ordinary. Neat lawn, porch light on. I parked 3 houses down and waited. At 11:43 p.m, a light flicked on upstairs. A silhouette moved behind the curtains. Dr. Raymond Fletcher, age 67, retired psychiatrist, former military contractor, worked with the Department of Defense in the 70s and 80s. Recently contacted by investigative journalists, he'd spoken about programs involving children. I knew all of that. I knew it without knowing how. The back door lock took 30 seconds. Quiet. Professional. Inside, the house was still. Just the soft hum of the refrigerator and the tick of an old grandfather clock in the hallway. I moved through the rooms like I'd lived there, avoided the creaky floorboards, sidestepped furniture I somehow already knew would be there. He was in the study, sitting at a desk covered in files and photographs. He looked up. His face went pale. "Dear God," he whispered. There was no rage in me, no panic, just a kind of grim focus, a stillness. "You're one of them," he said. His eyes were glassy with fear. "There's nothing to say," I told him. He took a shaky breath. M17410. He blinked at me like he was seeing a ghost. "I remember you. You were one of the successful ones." He reached for the phone on his desk. I was faster. My hand shot forward, seized his wrist with cold precision. "Please," he said. "I didn't want to hurt anyone. I was following orders. I tried to make the program more humane. Humane. As if that word belonged anywhere near what they'd done to us." I didn't speak. There was no need. The case was already beside me. Leather, worn, familiar. I didn't remember packing it, but it felt like mine. Inside, surgical instruments, vials, medical-grade syringes. Everything necessary to make a death look natural, a stroke, a heart attack. Something unremarkable for a man in his 60s. Fletcher's eyes widened as I opened the case. He began to cry, not loudly, but in a soft, pitiful way, like a man mourning his own life. "I tried to help those children," he whispered. "I swear to you, I tried." I didn't answer, because I wasn't there anymore. The part of me that could feel pity or empathy or even disgust was gone. All that remained was the programming. As I unlatched the case, his voice broke through, urgent, trembling. "Wait, I can give you the deactivation sequence. You don't have to do this." But I didn't respond. Couldn't. Something had taken over. The words didn't register. Caleb Monroe was still in there, somewhere deep inside, but no longer in control. It was like watching the world through a thick pane of glass while someone else moved his arms, made his choices. Choices he would never willingly make. And then I was waking up. My bedroom came into focus slowly. Familiar, mundane. The hum of Sarah's alarm clock buzzed steadily from the nightstand. 6 a.m. My wife was already up, moving around, rifling through drawers for clothes. The soft rustle of fabric filled the space between us. "You were restless last night," she said, not looking at me. talking in your sleep again. I sat up slowly, testing every inch of my body. No aches, no blood, no dirt. My clothes were clean, pajamas folded properly, but something didn't feel right. Like a page in a book had been torn out and pasted back in with the wrong words. I reached for the jeans I'd worn yesterday, still draped over the chair. In one pocket, something stiff. A business card. I turned it over. Dr. Raymond Fletcher, PhD, Psychiatric Consulting, Arlington, Virginia. The card was slightly bent, as if it had been handled many times. On the back, written in soft pencil, were the words, "The sparrow knows when to fly home." My stomach knotted. While Sarah showered, I turned on the TV and flipped through the local channels until the news came on. The anchor, face carefully, composed, stood outside a 2-story suburban home that looked eerily familiar, identical to the one from whatever it was. Dream? Memory? Arlington police are investigating the death of a retired psychiatrist found in his home early this morning. Dr. Raymond Fletcher, 67, appears to have died of natural causes, though the investigation is ongoing. My skin crawled. The same. Dr. Fletcher from the card. The same house I'd seen, somehow, in my head. The phone rang just as I was pulling on my shirt. Unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. Hello. This time there was no silence, no delay. A woman's voice, crisp and without emotion, spoke clearly. Subject, M17-410, status report. The words struck like a slap. I sat down hard on the edge of the bed, the phone trembling in my grip. Who is this? I said, barely able to get the words out. Mission completed successfully. Await further instructions. I don't understand. I don't remember doing anything. You're not supposed to remember, she said calmly. That's the point. I shook my head. Dr. Fletcher, he was just trying to help. I didn't kill anyone. There was a pause. Then the voice returned, quiet but unwavering. Caleb, Monroe didn't kill anyone. A beat. But you're not just Caleb Monroe, are you? You're also M17-410. And M17-410 is very good at his job. The line went dead. I sat frozen for a long time, staring at the business card. A faint indentation remained where my thumb pressed against the penciled phrase. Fletcher had tried to reach me, tried to help. He'd offered a deactivation code, and the programming had silenced him before I could hear it. My own hands had done it. Used like tools, not mine, not really. And yet, it had felt so easy, so natural. That was the part that truly terrified me. 2 days passed in a haze. Then Lena called. Her voice was tight with fear, stripped of formality. They're cleaning house, she said without greeting. 3 of our people died yesterday. Natural causes, officially. But I know better. We met at the lake, the same park where we'd first talked. She looked different this time. Not just tired, hollow, haunted. Whatever defenses she used to hold herself together were crumbling. It's an exit protocol, she explained as we walked along the water's edge. When a project like Hermes becomes too old or too exposed, they start erasing it. Everything. Everyone. You mean... I stopped. Us? She nodded. I mean us. She handed me a manila folder, thicker than the last one she'd given me. I found this on my kitchen table yesterday morning. Someone had been inside. They wanted me to see it. Inside were personnel files, 23 of them. Each had a photo and basic stats. I recognized several faces from Lena's previous research. Ordinary people, school teachers, engineers, retirees, every one of them, like me, ticking time bombs with forgotten pasts and buried commands. My file was third, from the top. Subject, M17-410. Name, Monroe, Caleb James. Status, active specialization, elimination, sanitation trigger. Phrases, redacted exit protocol. Authorized. I looked up at Lena. Her eyes were glassy with unshed tears. They're coming for us, she whispered. We're next, I read the page aloud, my voice dry and barely steady. What does that mean? Lena didn't answer right away. She flipped toward the back of the folder, her fingers moving with an eerie calm. She found what she was looking for, a single sheet of paper on stiff letterhead. Most of it was redacted, including the name of the agency at the top. Still, the title was clear. Termination Procedures, Project Hermes. Her eyes scanned it quickly, jaw tightening. Then she began to read. When operational assets become compromised or unnecessary, the following protocol should be implemented. Asset will receive activation call containing exit phrase. Asset will comply with self-termination directive. Death will appear consistent with suicide or accidental death. All associated documentation will be destroyed. Exit phrase. The tulip field is empty. My eyes froze on those last words. The tulip field is empty. Something in my brain twitched, like a switch being slowly flipped. Just reading it triggered a strange heaviness in my limbs, a fog pressing in from the edges of my awareness. A strange lethargic acceptance began to settle into my bones. They're going to kill us, I said, my voice low. Lena corrected me bitterly. No, they're going to make us kill ourselves, just like they made us kill others. I looked at her, heart pounding. One phone call, she said, and we'll walk into traffic, or step off a building, or put a gun in our mouths. And we won't even know why. Just a quiet exit, clean, neat. There has to be a way to. Stop it, I said, gripping the folder with shaking hands. Dr. Martinez has been working on deprogramming techniques, she said, her voice shaky now, trying to isolate trigger phrases, rewire the conditioning. But it's not perfect. It takes time, and I don't think we have much left. As if conjured by her words, my phone rang. I stared at the screen. Unknown number. Lena's head snapped toward me, her expression turning pale. Don't answer it. But my hand was already moving, not from decision, from reflex. Some part of me, buried deep, was responding before I could think. It wasn't just about phrases. It was context, patterns, triggers. The sound of a phone ringing at exactly the wrong moment. I pressed the screen. Hello? Silence. Then, a faint click. I started to pull the phone away when a voice whispered through the line, muffled, like it was coming from the bottom of a deep, dark well. The tulip field is empty. The world blurred. My vision narrowed. The edges of reality faded to grey. I heard Lena yelling something, but her voice was distant, muffled, foreign, like it came from behind thick glass or underwater. The phone slipped from my fingers. My body started moving, without hesitation, without resistance. I walked. Each step was calm, purposeful, silent, toward the lake. The air was sharp and cold. The water ahead shimmered under a blanket of early morning light. I understood, with a quiet certainty, exactly what I was going to do. Walk into the lake, deeper and deeper, until the water swallowed me whole. It would look like an accident, an early morning misstep by a man with too much on his mind. Maybe he slipped on the bank. Maybe he couldn't swim. Sarah would grieve, but she'd move on. The insurance would pay out. No uncomfortable questions about government programs or childhood trauma. No one would talk about the dirty mechanisms buried beneath national security. I was ankle deep in the freezing water when Lena hit me. We crashed into the shallows. Cold water splashed over my face as I gasped, the shock briefly jolting me. But the pull was still there, heavy and numbing. Her arms locked around my chest from behind. And then, in my ear, her voice, desperate and urgent, repeating something, over and over. The sparrow flies home when the rain stops. The sparrow flies home when the rain stops. The words struck something inside me, something fragile but real. A crack in the haze, a counterphrase, maybe something Dr. Martinez had designed, or maybe something Lena had dug up in a moment of desperation, flipping through notes, guessing at lifelines. The words kept coming, pounding like a heartbeat. The sparrow flies home when the rain stops, and then light broke through. The fog peeled away like smoke on wind. My limbs went slack. I gasped and sat up, soaked to the skin, heart slamming against my chest. My breath came in short, jagged bursts. Lena hovered beside me, soaked and shivering, eyes wide with worry. "Are you okay?" I nodded, but I didn't know what okay even meant anymore. I looked at her, water dripping from my hair, teeth chattering. "How did you know that would work?" She hesitated, then looked down at the muddy ground. "I didn't," she admitted, softly. "It was a guess. Something from Dr. Martinez's notes about linguistic reversals, neural associations. I had no idea if it would snap you out of it." I looked back toward the lake, the calm water giving no clue to what had almost happened. We sat there, side by side, not speaking, just breathing, alive, for now. "We think the programming can be disrupted," Lena said, breath clouding in the frosty air. "If you introduce a conflicting command at the right moment, something strong enough to break the pattern." We sat there on the muddy bank, soaked to the bone, shivering. January air bit through our clothes, but neither of us moved. The park around us carried on like nothing had happened. Children shrieked with laughter on swings, their parents chatting nearby. A jogger passed behind us, earbuds in, oblivious. Couples strolled along the walking paths, hand in hand. The world kept spinning, blind to the two drenched middle-aged strangers who had just survived something no one else could see. I looked at Lena. "What happens now? Now we run," she said, wiping water from her face. "We disappear before they can try again. New names, new identities, somewhere far away. We stay off-grid, and we spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders." She was right, of course. It was the only plan that made sense. But as I sat there watching people enjoy the safety of their ordinary lives, I felt the chill of something colder than the lake water creeping through me. It wasn't just fear, it was doubt. Because deep inside me, something else was still alive. Quiet, patient, waiting. The programming, it hadn't been erased, just interrupted. "What if it's not enough?" I said quietly. Lena turned to me. "What do you mean?" I hesitated, fingers tightening around the crumpled business card in my pocket. I remembered Dr. Fletcher's face, his fear when he saw me, the urgency in his voice, the words scrawled on the back of his card. "The sparrow knows when to fly home. What if we didn't run?" I asked. "What if we went hunting instead?" I'm writing this from a motel room just outside Tucson, Arizona. It's been 6 months since that morning at Burke Lake. 6 months since Lena and I decided to stop running. 6 months since we became the predators instead of the prey. We've tracked down 11 of them so far. The handlers, the programmers, the administrators, the ones who sat behind desks in anonymous buildings and turned children into weapons, who filed reports and ran simulations, tweaking minds like software, building soldiers without consent and discarding them when they became inconvenient. Some of them died quickly. Others, we gave time to talk, to explain, to justify. But none of their explanations were good enough. None of their reasons erased what they'd done. Not to us, not to the others. Lena says she believes we're making a difference, that we're tearing out the roots before another Project Hermes can grow. Maybe she's right, but I suspect something darker. I think we're still doing exactly what we were programmed to do, eliminating threats to national security. Only now, the threats are the people who created us. There's a crack running through the mirror in the motel bathroom, thin, jagged. It splits my reflection into two uneven halves, each version of me slightly misaligned with the other. Sometimes I stare at it for hours, trying to figure out which side is Caleb Monroe and which is M17-410. Other times I wonder if there was ever really a difference at all. Sarah filed for divorce 3 months ago. I don't blame her. How could I? How do you stay married to someone who disappears for weeks at a time and comes back with new scars, empty eyes and no answers? She deserved better. A husband who could look her in the eye and tell the truth. But that version of me is gone. Buried, somewhere under layers of conditioning and memories I don't fully trust. The worst part? Sometimes I feel more like M17 410 than Caleb Monroe. And sometimes I'm okay with that.